Madam Chair, you have a live mic.
Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting of the Big Cypress Basin Board to order. I'd like to verify that Michael Romano is joining us virtually and is connected. Mr. Romano, could you please? Okay. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
And Mr. Andy Hill will be joining us virtually in a little while. So we'll confirm with him when that time comes, Troy, when he's connected.
Yes, ma'am.
If everyone will please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Welcome, everyone. Today is the first meeting of our new fiscal year, or the last meeting of our calendar year. As a reminder, today's proceedings are accessible by Zoom, as well as Collier TV and the district's website. Board members, when speaking, please speak into the microphone so you're picked up and the people at home can hear you. And if you turn your head because we're having a conversation, take that mic with you so that you're able to be understood. Mr. Romano, please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, and Troy will call on you and you'll show up on my monitor. For the public, for those here in person, if you'd like to comment on an agenda item, please complete a speaker card in the lobby and bring it up front to Mr. Troy Miller, who's seated to my right. If you're joining by Zoom, use the raise the hand feature and Troy will call on you. If you're participating via phone, *9 raises your hand and *6 mutes and unmutes your phone. Today we have a special recognition, and Lisa, I'm going to let you do the honors and help us recognize Mr. Touche. And if I could ask the board members to please join me in front.
Mako, why don't you come on up too? We're so happy you're back today. So, want to take a moment and, hold on before I get started. Whoops. There we go. Thank you, Joy. Mako started working for the district almost 32 years ago. And as you can see from the photos, he has always been a person who valued his friendships and his relationships at work. He was always the go-to guy for everybody. And in fact, whenever I first started at the district 15 years ago, and I'm trying to learn everything that, as you new board members have gone through, trying to learn as a new employee. And I kept hearing everybody say, if you need something, call Mako. I was like, who's this Mako guy? But they were right. Once you ever called Mako and you wanted something done, it got done. And so he is always that person on the team that people could rely on. And he's done so much for us over the years. So he started with the Basin as an operator, doing repairs, keeping our canals clean, making sure that we could do what we needed to do. But then after a few years, he got to go to land management and work in crew and work on all the preservation efforts there. And so, keeping all of the hiking trails clean, prescribed burns, everything that our land management folks do. And so he had a great few years there, but I'd like to believe he saw the light and came back to the Basin towards the end of his career. But over those years, he's received a lot of recognitions and special training, and we appreciate all of the work that he has done for us over those years. One of the things that Mako was very instrumental in is planning those emergency bank repairs that we have had. A lot of them are on FACA, but they're really kind of all throughout the system. You don't get a canal system that's 40 years old without some needed maintenance and emergency repairs that pop up. And Mako's the kind of guy that's always reaching beyond agency lines to get that help, whether it be from Collier County, other field stations, his coworkers, and got the job done. And it protects not only our flood control system, but also private properties that are along the canals. So the work that he has done has been really very important to us. And then even more recently, on our FACA Union 1 structure, which is a main outfall down by Port of the Islands, there was some damage to the structure that had to be repaired, but it's an older structure. It doesn't have access like our newer structures did. So he needed to get into the middle of the canal. So not letting anything stop him, because that's the kind of person he is, he built a road into our canal, as you can see on the photographs on the screen. So then he could drive his equipment out to the middle and do the work that was needed. And so if that's not enough challenge, there's also the tides, because that's a main outfall. And tides don't coincide with our work schedule. So, so Mako, again, you know, the type of guy that he is and dedicated to our community and to this basin, would come to work early, 4 a.m. so that he could start work and get as much done before that high tide came back at the end of the day. So the community appreciates you, Mako, for everything that you did for us. We at the Basin appreciate you and want to say thank you for your 32 years of work with the agency. And we wish you a well-deserved retirement.
I still remember the time that I went out to observe our canal maintenance, and Mako was at the Long Reach, and he gave me a class on how to use the Long Reach. And it was just amazing because he is so good at what he does. And he could really make those levers sing and get that shovel where it needs to be in the canal to remove the excess debris and vegetation. And it looks a lot easier when he does it than if you attempt to do it. So I want to thank you for your service to the district, to the Basin, you and your wife, Dawn. I know we'll have a wonderful retirement together. And the family, I'm sure, is looking forward to having you at home more frequently. And best of luck to you. And don't be a stranger to the Basin, because we appreciate everything. With that, Lisa, agenda revisions. Are there any agenda revisions?
No, Madam Chair, there are not.
Okay. All right, then we'll go to agenda item extension by board members. I'm going to ask each board member if you have a disclosure or abstention. We'll start with Vice Chair Waters.
None for me, ma'am.
Michelle McLeod.
No, none.
Michael Romano.
None for me.
Okay. Ms. PJ Smith.
None for me.
Okay, great. And I do not have any. All right. We'll now move to the approval of the August 25th, 2023 meeting minutes. If there are any corrections or additions to the minutes, I'll hear them now. If not, I'll take a motion and a second for approval of the minutes.
Make a motion to approve.
So second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor for approval of the minutes, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That passes unanimously. Okay, we get to the Basin Administrator's Report. Lisa?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd like to also wish you all a happy new fiscal year. It's an exciting time for us. And I want to highlight a few of the goals and projects that we are wanting to accomplish this year. First off is resiliency. I want to talk about those projects that we want to tackle this year. The top one is our tower, which we talked about in August, that was finally moving forward. So we are 3 weeks into the fiscal year and we are already in design on that tower. So our goal for the end of the year is to have the design finished, it permitted, and we go through and we start construction. So that is our goal for this fiscal year for our top resiliency project. The other is work that the field station is doing. They are replacing fuel tanks at several of our structures for the generators. So we have a more robust and longer runtime on our generators. The other item that the field station is going to be working on this year is improvements to the 951 North structure, which is, I think, close to Vanderbilt Drive and 951. And they will be instrumental in making that structure remote control operations. As you all know, that makes our system much more robust when we have that remote control operation. So those are our 3 projects in resiliency. For flood control, we are starting design on 3 new water control structures this year. One is at I-75-2, which is behind the hospital at Pine Ridge, and then structures at Gordon River and Palm River. So also a robust goal for the year is to get those 3 designed. And then for restoration environmental work, our land management crews are really focusing on removal of exotics, the willow in crew lands. You're going to hear discussion about the work that Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary is doing with willow removal. So it really makes sense that the district, we're doing that same willow removal. So that's a goal by our land management section for this year, as well as they will be expanding the parking lot at Bird Rookery. If you've been out there, you see, especially during season, cars end up parking along Shady Hollow Road because it is such an attractive trail system that we just don't have enough parking for our public. So land management this year is going to be expanding parking facilities at that location. So those are just some highlights of what we're going to be accomplishing this year for you. And before I turn it back to you, Madam Chair, I just want everybody to make sure that you saw the calendar, your 2024 calendar dates for your board meetings. And unless there are any questions, we'll get those posted to the website and on public calendars as we move into 2024. Any questions?
Thank you, Lisa. Did everyone have a chance to look at the board dates? Okay, so everybody's got that on their calendar. Okay, super. Thank you for that. Appreciate the report. All right, next we have general public comment. There are 2 opportunities for the public to speak, once at this point in the meeting and once towards the end of the meeting for items that are not on the agenda. We'll start with anyone who is here in person to speak first, and then we'll move to those who are joining us remotely. So Troy, is there any public comment?
Madam Chair, I have one registered speaker in the room, Michelle Arquette Palermo. And at this point, no one has raised their hand on Zoom.
Good morning. Michelle Arquette Palermo with the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. I wanted to update this board and the community at large about an exploratory study currently being undertaken by the Naples Airport Authority. Earlier this month, the authority approved the spending of $438,151 for a study that will result in the preliminary identification of sites within Collier County that could potentially be developed into a new airport. During September's meeting, Commissioner Burns gave a presentation on how a new site for the Naples Airport could be located in Picayune Strand Forest within the SERP footprint. Initial reaction could be a chuckle, but a wise person once said to me, no matter how crazy an idea may seem, If it makes it to paper, you better pay attention. At the meeting in September, the Conservancy's policy director, Nicole Johnson, requested that Picayune Strand be removed from any further consideration as a potential location. I reiterated that request this month, as well as requested that the Conservancy be invited to participate in the stakeholder meetings identified in the scope of work for the particular study. We also believe that it be pertinent that the district and Basin Board staff be included in these meetings, especially because Mr. Burns' presentation cited that one of the benefits of Picayune location would be enhanced water quality with the Southwest Florida management. My assumption is that Mr. Burns was actually referring to the South Florida Water Management District. The Conservancy will continue to pay attention to this matter, and we hope that others will join us in stating that Picayune Strand is an inappropriate location to consider for an airport. Thank you for your time.
Madam Chair, that is the only registered speaker in the room, and we still have no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, thank you for that comment. We'll move on to our discussion agenda. And the first item is the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary Ecosystem Restoration Project update. Mr. Sean Murphy is going to tee it up, and then we'll have Dr. Sean Clem make her presentation.
Yeah, good morning, Madam Chair, and returning board members. Sean,
Sean, could you get to the microphone, please?
can you hear me now? Hey, good morning. Today, I'm pleased to present a brief introduction and overview of our collaborative effort between the Basin and the Audubon for the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary Ecosystem Restoration Project update for fiscal year 2022. The Big Cypress Basin Strategic Plan details our mission at the Basin and provides us with a roadmap for how we allocate our resources and determine our program objectives. Our program objectives include projects that are focused on water quality and ecosystem restoration. Our partnership with the Audubon meets those objectives. The Big Cypress Basin has worked with the Audubon providing ecosystem restoration or habitat restoration since 2021. And in February of 2022, the Big Cypress Basin approved funding for $174,480 for the removal of 200 acres of willow and other dense brush inside Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. To date, the Basin has provided $414,480 for willow removal and habitat restoration within the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, and has helped remove over 600 acres of willow and dense shrub. The Audubon has already completed this year's shrubification and are continuing to monitor the restoration efforts, and will be presenting the results in next year's October board meeting. And the project results will be discussed in detail in the Audubon's presentation, but the overall benefits of the project were to reestablish critical wetlands for wading birds, increase water storage, reduce drought stress, and reintroduce prescribed fire for long-term management. Before I turn it over to the sanctuary for their presentation, are there any questions regarding the program or project overview?
Are there any questions from the board? Okay, no, Sean.
All right, if we don't have any questions, I'll turn it over to the Audubon's research director, Sean Clem, to present on the ecosystem restoration update. Thank you.
Morning. We've got double Sean's for you this morning, so it's a little confusing.
Yes, but they're spelt different, right?
Right. Thank you for inviting us to speak today. Nice to see you again, Madam Chair. And this is the first time that Audubon has been here since we have 2 new board members. And so I wanted to, on behalf of the Sanctuary Director, welcome you to the board. We're excited to work with you, and we'd love to, get you out to see the sanctuary in person at some point in time. As Sean mentioned, I'm going to give an update on 2 seasons ago, restoration. But just to orient us again, here is where the sanctuary is located in kind of the northern end of Collier County. We've got over 13,000 acres of conservation land. Our acreage is central to the 70,000 acre Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed. And Audubon has had a presence here conserving this land for over 100 years. Audubon first had staff on the ground in the early 1900s to protect this site from plume hunters during the plume trade. The sanctuary was formally established in 1954, so next year we'll be celebrating 70 years of conservation at the sanctuary. The site is recognized internationally. We're both a wetland of international importance from the Ramsar Committee and a wetland of distinction from the Society of Wetland Scientists. So the problem that we're facing, one of the biggest problems that we're facing right now is the expansion of shrubs across our herbaceous marsh. All of these species are native species and they're triggered to move across grassy wetlands, essentially. They're triggered by hydrologic change. So when we saw the hydraulics, the primary means of them going into a mode of explosive growth. So when we're going to hear more about the hydrologic challenges that we've seen at Corkscrew, later in this meeting. But one of the things that we're doing right now is trying to address some of these symptoms that we're seeing. And one of the biggest symptoms we're seeing of it is this change in land cover. So we're seeing these three species, Carolina willow, buttonbush, red maple, all of which are native species. We're seeing them take over our grassy marshes. And what they're doing is responding to a shorter hydro period, less water, water for less of the year. They're trying to make that marsh essentially back into a forest. And so our purpose for removing them is to kind of hold the line until we get some hydrologic relief from restoration, which will ultimately, in addition to prescribed fire, help keep them at bay. And so this is what a monoculture of willow, essentially, growing in a marsh looks like. And the problems are that once willow gets to, a mature size, it's unable to support fire. So we can no longer use prescribed fire as a management tool to maintain native plant communities and keep the habitat open for wildlife and particularly wading birds to be able to use that habitat. They said it reduces that wildlife habitat for, wading birds, even our mammals. Moving across this habitat is very, very difficult once that mature willow develops. Willow is a very thirsty plant. And so while our native grasses are replaced by willow and some of these other shrubs, they have deeper leaves. They also transpire more water. So once willow moves into that habitat, we're losing more water to the atmosphere. So we're exacerbating the water loss problem. And then finally, when willow moves in, it makes it very difficult to maintain this land, not only with fire, but also for our staff to be able to get in and remove non-native species. So it makes this habitat really vulnerable to non-native species taking over. And the willow that we're seeing in the Corkscrew watershed is pretty extensive. This is kind of an estimated coverage before we started the willow removal project. You can see not only willow covering in these yellow areas, and I say willow, but I'm really meaning willow and the suite of other species. You see it not only extensive in the sanctuary, but also throughout Crew. And if we had done this for the whole of peninsular Florida, you would see it all over the St. John's Water Management District wetlands. You would see it in a lot of places in the Everglades. It's a growing problem that we're seeing across the landscape. We've been working real closely with Crew and with the staff trying to, use the methods and learn from each other in our different willow removal strategies. And that's an active partnership that we're talking to land managers over in Crew on a weekly basis about our willow approach. And over the last 10 years or so, we've developed a pretty robust 3-step restoration strategy. And that's first going in the height of the dry season when the system is as dry as possible and mulching those shrubs. We bring in machinery that is large, but has a light footprint, so it's not disturbing the soils. And we're mulching those plants in place so the nutrients stay in the system, but we're just basically grinding it down to the ground level. Over the next 3 to 5 years, since we basically just come in and mowed the lawn in the marsh, those plants are going to keep trying to come back. When another reason that we do it in the height of the dry season is because when the rainy season water returns to the system, the hope is that it does that just a few weeks after we've done this mulching and it drowns the willow. So the ultimate way that the willow usually dies is through drowning because it's been stressed by the mulching and then it gets inundated with water for, 6 months out of the year. What the drowning doesn't kill, our crews are on the ground with herbicide trying to stay on top of. I'll show you some images. You can see that willow really wants to come back, especially in the first couple of years. So this second step of staying on top of anything that's trying to come back is really important. It's also important because non-native species love disturbed systems. And so as soon as we do this, the non-natives try to come in too. So that's another reason we really stay on top of it in the second phase. Ultimately, while we're being really selective and removing that stuff that's trying to come back, native fuels are building back up in the system. And in a couple of years, we can get prescribed fire in there. Prescribed fire, when it's frequent enough and effective enough, can keep willow at bay and creates the heterogeneity or the patchy landscape that we know that wildlife need, and that gives us the biodiversity that historically was in the sanctuary. So we've been working at this for a while now, and there's a couple of key things that I think have made our efforts successful. The first is, we started out with really small units and we've begun doing larger and larger units. This makes that last step of reintroducing prescribed fire a lot easier because we now have units that are large enough to get fire in on their own. We're also building on previously mulched units, giving us more and more access to the marsh each year to be able to get equipment out there. We also go into each season with a lot of flexibility. We know that each year's hydrologic conditions are going to be different, ground conditions are going to be different. So we go into each season with a suite of possible sites that we could go to. We have staff on the ground with our contractor to go in. If there's any sign that soils are too wet, too soft, we pull out and we go to another site. So having that flexibility from the beginning gives us the ability to really make sure that we're protecting the ecosystem in the process of the restoration. Again, mulching just before the rainy season makes this work the most effective. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten that crystal ball yet, so we never know exactly when the rain's going to come. So some years we get the timing just right, and sometimes the rain comes a little bit too early or a little bit too late, and that we are able to adjust through that phase too. If the rain comes a little bit too late, that just means we need to do more spot treatment afterwards. If the rain comes too early, that just means we do less acres than we plan to do. And then finally, I can't emphasize enough the importance of that second phase, and I'll show you some data that support that. We really not only need to come in and mulch it, but stay on top of it for the first couple of years. So as Sean mentioned, since 2013, we've mulched just under 1,400 acres. This map here shows you the extent of what we've mulched to date. This includes the work that was done just this past year, and we have been have received support from the basin to do this work for the last 3 years. I'm going to focus in on this red rectangle for the next couple of slides that will give us a little bit of a zoomed in look at what we did in 2022. So in 2022, we mulched a total of 252 acres, and that was in 4 primary units. We did 140 acres in this first unit, which was 2022D, 11 acres in this small pocket down below that, 2022E, 71 acres over on the west side of the road, 2022F. And then finally, towards the end of the season, once it was dry enough to get in there, we got another 30 acres over on the east side in 2022G. And this is my favorite part of this presentation because the imagery of the before and after of this is really compelling. It's great to look at in pictures. Again, if anyone wants to get out to these sites to see them, it is much more compelling, even so in person. So this is, if you're standing on the ground at one of these sites, this is what it looks like, 5 or 6 feet off of the ground, looking into that willow prior to restoration. This is what it looks like just within a week or two of the mulching. You can already see, those native species trying to come back. 3 months later, 6 months later, and then a full year after restoration. We still don't have enough fuel on the ground in this picture to get fire in there, but you can see those native fuels building up so that we can reintroduce fire. To take a wood stork's view of this habitat, this is another series of photos showing the same area, but this is about 60 feet off the ground to give you that landscape perspective. This is what it looks like prior to the restoration, immediately after. You can see that our contractor is selective enough that they're able to leave. If we have pockets of native vegetation that are in good shape, we can leave those behind. 3 months after restoration, 6 months, and then a year after restoration. And these are all those sites that were, mulched with the district's help in 2022. We've also been really successful this past year to reintroduce prescribed fire. We're now able to get fire into some of the units that were done on the earlier side of the restoration. So it's hard to really look at them on a map because it's, patches and pockets that we're able to burn here. As we move forward and our bigger units are coming and are ready for fire, we'll be able to show that better on a map where those units that are in full restoration are. But you can see this is a picture of one of our restoration sites. You can see that wildlife are responding, and it's really visually compelling to get out there and see the wading birds, to see the deer out there. We've seen bears walking through a newly mulched swamp. But as a science-guided organization, the other thing we're doing is collecting data to be able to demonstrate the restoration success and to be able to fine-tune our methods. So one of the tools that we're really utilizing, because our sites are often remote and hard to get to, are UAVs or drones. We're able to use drone imagery to track our restoration through time. We use a multispectral camera at fixed points in time, and the imagery on those cameras are fine-tuned enough that you can pick up individual species through the color signal that each plant gives out. So we're able to take an image like this and process it to be able to pull out, what's willow and what's red maple and what are other species, what's open canopy. And then over time, as we do the restoration, we can track how each of these units change. And so from that, we can extract the data out and we can document quantitatively the restoration response that we're getting. So in this graph, you can see that, prior to restoration, we had about 60% coverage of willow in that unit. Immediately after mulching, it was down to 0 because we got rid of all of that willow. In the first few months, willow tried to come back. It wasn't the big, 10-foot tall willow, but it was knee-high willow really trying to come back. That's when our land managers were on the ground removing that. And you can see how effective that was in months 6 through 18 there, that we're able to stay on top of it, able to keep it out of the system. And we're continuing to monitor all of our units long-term. The other thing we're looking at a couple other things, but another one that's really interesting, I think, is wading bird use of the marsh. We know we're creating new habitat or restoring habitat, bringing habitat back. I think that this willow expansion across the marshes is a big part of why we're not seeing wood storks like we did historically in the cruise system, because there's just not foraging habitat available for them. So we can look at some of those things, again, using drone technology. One of my staff is doing some really innovative work where he's, taking the drone up using video imagery, then taking those images back. And he's able to not only identify each bird to species, but put a point on each bird and map it in space so that we can see over time. These are just the results of 3 different surveys, but we're now able to see in, month by month, or depending on how often our surveys are done, we're able to see how wading birds are using the marsh and how that changes over time. And that's going to be one of the things we're able to measure, not only the success of our restoration, but then we also have that data. Once we can get some hydrologic restoration of the system, we'll be able to look at how wading birds respond to that. So the next step for this project, again, as Sean mentioned, just this past year, we mulched another 276 acres. I'm happy to say we're starting to run out of acres. So we're seeing the end of this part of this project coming sooner. We're continuing to steward and stay on top of all of those mulched units to try to get them to full restoration. But we're also looking at some alternative methods. There's some areas that we know we just can't get heavy equipment into. And so we're working with partners across the state to try to see what others are doing, what success they've had, to see what other methods we can add to our toolbox of options. We're really working, across the board with partners to try to advance the science of this work. We recently did, there's a big Everglades science meeting every 2 years. We held a whole symposium this past year on this issue of shrubs and how they're advancing in the system. We're engaging partners from agencies throughout the state and really trying to, create an open forum for sharing the best science that's out there. And we're using that to try to guide permitting practices. It's one of the things I've been working with the folks at Crew about is, how do we get the permits in place to be able to do what we've done elsewhere? And what hurdles can we help overcome to make sure that we're demonstrating the effectiveness of that? Because anytime you bring heavy machinery into marshes, it makes people really nervous. And then finally, this is a little bit of a Band-Aid right now. Ultimately, we need hydrologic restoration in order to make this project endure long-term and make it sustainable. With that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Klum. I really appreciate that. That was a fantastic photo of those roseate spoonbills in full breeding plumage with the orange tails. Those were just beautiful. That was a beautiful photo. Are there questions by the board for Dr. Klum?
Yeah.
Vice Chair Water.
Thank you for the presentation. Very good. Couple questions. One, just in terms of percentage roughly of what you have that you think you could do this removal on and get back to marsh. Any feel roughly on what percent we've completed?
Well, so areas that we think that we could use these same methods on that we're using now, we estimate we probably have about 300 to 400 more acres that we could get in and do that.
Okay. And based on the rate you're going, it would be, it'd be a couple more years.
Yeah,
but
probably 2 more big years.
Okay.
But then there's some other areas that we know are more complicated. And so, for example, there's 400 acres of Corkscrew Central Marsh that is much less accessible, that has been taken over by willow, that has a huge peat deposit that makes it just really soft organic soils. And so we're being more cautious, trying to figure out what the long-term, what the best practice is going to be for that.
Okay, thank you. And then in terms of, to the layman's eye, it looks fantastic. Certainly looks much better in terms of what it looks like. In terms of trying to score it and say, all right, what is the improvement in function? What kind of things are you looking at? Is the hydrology better without the willow there? Is it wildlife usage? What are the things that what kind of factors you'd look at and say, all right, we can evaluate that this is working?
That's a great question. I think hydrology is a tough one to measure because our hydrology is so dynamic and because there's so many factors at play there over the short course of while we've been doing this project. That's a tough one for us to measure, but we are getting data on plant communities. We're demonstrating that not only are we getting rid of the shrubs, but we're getting really healthy native plant communities returning, increasing our biodiversity. We're also sampling fish and crayfish out there. So we're able to look at the aquatic fauna, that prey base for things like, animals like alligators and wading birds. So we do have some data we're collecting on that. Again, our wading bird data is showing that we're bringing wading birds, back into a system that was inaccessible for them before. And then we've tried to put some trail cameras up out there. It's hard you get really lucky when you get a larger animal moving through, but we've gotten some. So we know that larger animals are using it until we have some good game trails established through these new sites. That's a harder thing to measure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. And I would like to take you up on a on-site visit. If you go to page 29, when you have the initial spike to 0 and then it goes back up and then it levels off, is that pretty normal to level off like that? And is there a chance that it will come back and then before your hydrological restoration?
Yeah. So it's definitely normal the way it spiked back up. And I think when you look at this, you say, well, you started with 60 and then by 4 months later, you're down to 40. But it's a difference between 60% coverage of willow that's 10 feet high and 40% coverage of willow that's knee high. So that part of it is normal. The fact that we're seeing it, those levels stay down out to 18 months, I think is really a sign of the fact that our land management team has been able to stay on top of it. Often there's a pulse of, that when you first make a disturbance in an ecosystem, everything sees that as an opportunity, and all of the non-natives get in there, the natives try to get in there. I think what we're seeing is the community begin to stabilize a little bit more. We're seeing our land managers are able to keep that in check. And eventually we're seeing the native grasses move in, and they're able to not outcompete the willow, but they're able to crowd it enough that they're building up a biomass, and ultimately we'll get fire in, and that'll be what keeps it in check. So when I look at these numbers, I just see that, we are, it's the folks that are out in the field staying on top of it that are, I think they can take credit for the excellence that we're seeing there.
And then one other question. I love Dan's questions. Those were mine about the percentages, but overall, maybe you've said this, but what percentage of land was impacted by the willow and, the bad actors? Was it pretty much all over, or?
Well, it's a little bit funny to estimate that, because willow is a native species. So we know it was in the system to begin with. And we know that, from data that were collected by scientists working at the sanctuary back in the 70s, once the Golden Gate Canal system they started to see willow expand a little bit then, but they also were able to put a lot of fire on the ground back then and keep that willow in check. Even though it was trying to expand, those were the days that you could just walk through the swamp with a drip torch and just let it burn all the way across. And we can't do that anymore. Mike Joel will tell you all about that. And so I think we've seen that willow expanding, and I think that to try to find that line of, okay, this is pre, willow changing and post, it's tough. I'd have to run those numbers, and I'd love to follow up with you on that. I think originally estimated about 2,000 acres of willow in the system, and that's out of our 13,000 acres. So I think that'd be a back of the envelope number. But also during the course of the project, we've seen willow advance. The areas we hadn't gotten to have gotten even worse with willow. So it's definitely an exponentially increasing problem.
It gives me a good figure to kind of, I'm like, is it 100% or is it, okay, this is a little bit better.
We're getting really close to the end of this phase of it. There's a couple of big things we still have to tackle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. McLeod. You're not on the mic yet. So
I was impressed with this slide 2 on page 29, just amazed by how your team has been able to maintain it. How big is your land development team that's doing these hugely successful efforts here?
Right now, we've got 3 staff full-time in the field, and we've got 2 additional staff who assist. They're part of the research team. They assist with the prescribed fire. So primarily 3 staff. In most of this restoration, it's primarily 2 full-time staff, and a crew of volunteers that whoever we can wrangle to come out and help us out. But
that's amazing. Yeah, such a small team, but huge accomplishments.
Yeah, and it really, I think this year, the success we've seen in recent years really boils down to not only having the staffing but the equipment. It's a really difficult environment to work in, and every other day it's an airboat getting stuck, a buggy getting stuck, something breaking down. So I think our facilities team also gets a huge pat on the back for keeping everything running for us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this presentation.
yes, Dr. Klum, I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, I'd recommend to any board member who wanted to get out on Corkscrew to please take Dr. Klum and her team up on their offer. It's really wonderful to see the before and after in person. And as we come into the drier season, to see the wading birds preference for the well-maintained system versus the overgrown system. My question has to deal with Carolina willow. I mean, you mentioned that it's a native. It's not just problematic for Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. I meet with other areas, owners, property owners, and stakeholders that have Carolina willow issues. How did it become such a problem other than to be let go for so long? And what type of science is being implemented to understand it better so that we can keep it from spreading so quickly and taking over ecosystems. It's similar to the cabbage palm if left to its own devices, right? So
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. So willow is for us a plant we kind of love to hate because we're seeing it do this. But if you talk to people like Mike Duver who are working in the Picayune and trying to get succession to happen down in Picayune, willow is their best friend because, you know, it's a native plant that grows in an environment where it needs to have, it needs to be adapted to take advantage of situations. You know, it's an early colonizer. So when you change a system, it is for some reason triggered to move into that system, particularly a drier system. So down in Picayune, for example, they want to see willow advancing because they know that once willow advances, forest is going to follow. And that's going to be part of what regenerates the lost habitat, you know, what encourages the restoration of the Picayune. For us, I think willow is responding to the over drainage. And that's really the timeline of when we started to see willow advance is the timeline where, you know, we saw hydrology change. I think that just like, you know, with the hydrologic change, it took us a little time to see that because our system is so dynamic and we have these years that are really wet and then years that are really dry and then periods of a couple of years of drought or a couple of years that are really wet. And so there's a lot of noise in the system. So when you have a big change, sometimes it can be harder to see. And I think that's part of the reason it took us a few years to see the hydrologic change. During that time, the willow was advancing in a way that we're like, gosh, you know, I don't think we used to see as much willow. But again, it's a system that booms and busts naturally. So I think that's part of why it kind of went off of our radar. And then once it started to be identified as a problem, there's a little bit of a learning curve. Okay, well, what do we do? Because there's that debate of, well, it's a native species, just like with the cabbage palms. It's a native species. Do we intervene? Do we let the ecosystem do what the ecosystem wants to do? And so I think there's a lot of really tough questions with management of, you know, how heavy a hand do we have in the ecosystem's desire to change when it's changing from one suite of native species to another? The science that we've been relying on, a great deal of it is coming from St. John's River Water Management District, who is doing a lot of restoration in the upper St. John's, and they've been working on willow, publishing papers. They've worked with a lot of folks from Gainesville to understand a lot of the science of, you know, what it is that is driving willow, what it responds to, what, you know, just the idea that we can kill it by drowning once it's stressed. Now they're using different herbicides. So there's a lot of things that are going into trying to understand really what makes these species tick and then how we can, you know, use that knowledge to our advantage with management.
And one question on your plan to restore the areas. Are you looking at contiguous acres to build on what you've done before, or are you kind of moving around more in a patchwork plan?
We're building off of ourselves. We're building off of what's already been done primarily. There's some pockets that have come up. For example, there's some willow that's popped up that's not contiguous to other areas on the far side of our marsh, but it's immediately adjacent to where we know wood storks like to nest each year. I think that may be part of, you know, if you're a wood stork flying over the swamp, those cypress trees rising above the open water of the swamp, I think are one of the cues that wood storks say, gosh, that would be a great, you know, that's where we want to go and nest. When we have this mid-level canopy of willow rather than open water, the cypress forest doesn't look like the island that it did before. And so I think that's a lot of the trigger that we've lost at Corkscrew. So because of the geography there, you know, that pocket that's isolated becomes a target for us because we want to encourage wood storks to nest at the sanctuary because we know that's where they historically nested. And that's one of the best places in the county for them to nest because we've got this massive conservation land.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Let's see if there's any public comment, Troy.
I have no registered public comment.
Any further questions for Dr. Klum from the board? Great. Thank you for your excellent presentation. Really appreciate it. One thing that I might add, that when I was out at Corkscrew with the Basin team and Dr. Klum and her team, you know, they showed one area of willow that had been eradicated and they discovered a tree island. underneath all of that willow that had overgrown so much. So it's that thick out there. So I hope you get a chance to go out and see the results of some of these efforts. So thank you, Dr. Clem. All right, the next presenter is a final report of the Canal Bank study with the Naples Botanical Garden. And we have Chad Washburn, and I believe Sean Murphy's going to tee this off.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. Sean Murphy for the record. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the Canal Bank study with the Naples Botanical Garden. The Big Cypress Basin currently manages approximately 134 miles of canal. Of that, approximately half require routine mowing operations. Additionally, when we do tree removal projects, we also replace the disturbed areas with Bahia grass, and that also requires routine mowing. After receiving concerns from the public regarding mowing activity and grass clippings going into the canal, the board asked staff to investigate alternatives to the current species of grass, the Bahia, used along the canal banks. As a local leading expert, the Basin contracted Naples Botanical Garden to conduct a study based on the board's direction to look at native species that would reduce or eliminate mowing operations, reduce the amount of grass clippings that go into the canals, and also provide proper bank stabilization. We also partnered with Collier County to use one of their canal banks within Freedom Park for the study. And per our contract, Naples Botanical Garden was required to install 3 different species of native grasses, regularly monitor them, produce a final report, and present their study to the board today. Before I turn it over to Naples Botanical Garden, do you have any questions regarding this study?
Any questions for Sean? Great.
All right, Madam Chair, I'd like to introduce Chad Washburn, Vice President of Conservation at Naples Botanical Garden, to present on the Canal Bank study.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chad. Good to see you.
Very good to see you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, Madam Chair. This is the first time Naples Botanical Garden has an opportunity to be here in front of you. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And congratulations to Corkscrew Swamp. That's an incredible project, and it's great to see that that has been so successful. So as Sean mentioned, current practices along many canal banks and stormwater areas across South Florida are to use Bahia grass sod, which is a perennial grass from South America, to stabilize soil in bare areas. And while this grass fills that purpose of stabilization, it comes with additional management costs in the form of mowing. That can lead to unintended consequences of an increase of non-point source pollution as grass clippings enter the waterway, and a potential for increased competition from weeds when these areas are mown, leading to further management issues. Regular mowing requires inputs of workforce time, fuel, and machinery. And in some instances where slopes are too steep for a mower, like here in this picture, which is the canal in Freedom Park, cutting must be done with a string trimmer. All of this comes with some financial cost. And then when grass is cut too severely during these activities, it opens light gaps, and those light gaps allow weeds to get established and compete. And that compounds management issues because now we have weeds that we need to treat. Sorry, wrong direction. Grass clippings from regular mowing and trimming can also enter the waterway. And this is an example from that very same day in the previous picture where the canal banks were being mown, February 15th, 2022. And those grass clippings can be a significant source of non-point source pollution, especially across large areas like over 100 miles of canals. So the objectives of this study are to identify and trial native grass species that can require less mowing and maintenance, with the goal of reducing potential non-point source pollution, to reduce management costs, reduce competition against the weeds, but also stabilize soil and prevent erosion. So to do this, we look to our native Florida ecosystems for potential native grasses that fill all of these objectives. We look for the criteria of short height when they're mature, dense growth habit all year round, a tolerance to a wide range of conditions like flooding, drought, and salinity. And this is an example of an area that included all three of the native grasses that were chosen for this study. This is in Flamingo, Florida, and these are grasses in an area in the campground, near the campground, and you can see they're attractive and they fill each of those different objectives. The three species that were chosen for this project are Disticus spicata, or salt grass, and it's a grass commonly found in tidal marshes, but along coastal ecosystems, and the height ranges from 4 to 24 inches, and that's quite a spread, but as you look into the literature, you can find quite a range for each of these, and that really depends on if it's growing in drought conditions or where it's got access to more water. It forms dense monotypic stands and deep root systems, and it's tolerant to flooding from salt and fresh water. The next grass that we chose is Spirabolus virginicus, or seashore dropseed, and it grows again in a range of coastal conditions between 6 and 18 inches in height. And it forms a dense mat, again, like the other grass, and it's tolerant of drought and saltwater flooding. And the third species that we selected for this project was Paspalum vaginatum, or seashore paspalum. And it grows along the coastal areas, but it gets a little bit taller, 24 to 36 inches. However, it grows from tillers, and those tillers, while you pull one up and the height tends to be tall, it tends to grow out more prostrate along the ground. Again, this is a pioneer species in large, dense patches. And just out of curiosity, if a good example to look at what this grass, what makes it a good potential grass. I was on Marco Island in Residence Beach 2 days ago, and there was an area that was cordoned off for shorebird nesting, and it was cordoned off for 2 months. And on that spot on Residence Beach, because it wasn't raked, in 2 months, this grass has formed almost an entire lawn in monoculture on that site. So all of these grasses fit that niche, and they're all plants that we've identified from wild habitats. So this project was located on the north side of Freedom Park, which is located on the northeast corner of Golden Gate Parkway and Goodlet Frank Road in Collier County, Florida. And the project site is identified by the stars there on the north and south banks of the Freedom Park Bypass Canal. The project was laid out to identify the optimum species or mixture of species of these three grasses to meet the project objective of identifying native grass species that can require less mowing and maintenance for use along canals. The species were planted in 4 replications across the site, and you can see the blue is the canal, and then there's 4 replications, 2 on the north side and 2 on the south side. And each replication included species or mixtures of the species planted in 10-foot wide blocks from the top of the bank down to the water's edge. And each replication included 1 block of Bahia grass that was left in place, and that was our control. I'll start with a quick overview of the project timeline, and then go into some more details on each of these steps within the project timeline. The project started in late March of 2022 with a growing out of the plant material, and later that spring in June, we prepared the site for planting, and then in July, we began planting the grasses on the site. The project timeline was meant to grow out over the summer and into the early summer of 2023. So from 2022 spring to 2023. So sod for these 3 selected grass species are not currently widely available in South Florida. They've been used as sod in different areas around the world, and at times they are available here. But since they're not currently widely available, we grew out 2,000 2-inch plugs of each species of grass into healthy 4-inch plants for a total of 6,000 plants. And the benefit of us growing them, and you can see what it looks like here in a nursery, these are on tables in pots. The benefit of us growing them out from 2-inch plugs into 4-inch plants is that we can ensure that we had healthy plants with healthy root systems that were not overgrown. They had not been sitting in a 4-inch pot for long periods of time. We wanted healthy plants to begin this project. However, I should note that when plants are planted as 4-inch plugs, anytime there's bare soil, there's known potential for weeds. The same goes with areas of Bahia grass that are mowing. Anytime that there's bare soil, there's potential for weeds. Next step was site preparation. And you can see this is the canal. This is one of our plots. The Bahia grass sod was treated with an aquatic labeled herbicide and then left in place. And that dead Bahia grass was left in place so that it would help reduce any potential erosion. It still had its roots in place. So to help limit potential erosion at the beginning of the project until our grasses could be established, it had also reduced potential bare soil for weed seeds to come in and germinate until our grass plugs could grow and colonize the site. And then it's difficult to see in this picture, but up close you can see that planting spots for each of the plugs were marked in an evenly spaced grid with different colors so that we had all of the plants laid out as they were meant to be and in the right areas. And then here's what that looked like just shortly after planting. The plants were laid out according to the design, and then they were planted. We used an auger to minimize any potential damage to the banks or any disturbance. So rather than going out with a shovel and taking soil out and leaving soil there, that auger allowed us to just plant them right into the soil and with a 4-inch auger bit. And from this point on, we monitored and managed the plots and collected data. And you can see what that looked like in this photo at planting time. As we planted, we also included signage and fencing. A protective fence was installed around the project, and interpretive signage was installed in English and Spanish to both protect, identify the site, and interpret the site to the public. The study measurements that were taken throughout the project were plant height, percent cover, and below ground biomass. And just to interpret this photo, this is one of the measures of percent cover. And this photo was from September 4th, 2023, using that grass that I had showed in the earlier photo that was laid out in plugs. So throughout the project, we measured these, and I'll go into those a little bit here in a moment, what we found in those measurements. But then by October 19th, this is what the site looked like. I've outlined it in red. You can see some waves in different height. These are the different either single species or mixed plantings. And by this date, the native grass plantings started filling in, and this was on the south side of the canal, and these were the areas that were planted first. And you can see fencing along this. These grasses at this point in time are starting to achieve their mature heights. This project did come with some challenges. On September 23rd, every one of us was impacted by Hurricane Irma, and this caused some delays in our ability to monitor and manage the site. And then in December of 2022, so at some point in early December, the project site was mechanically mown, and somehow the entire site was mown, the canal bank along both north and south sides of the canal, including the project site. And then in January shortly after that, in January of 2023, the lower 2/3 of the project site were treated, and the entire canal bank were treated with a broad spectrum herbicide. And you can see that damage in this photo. The lower section of the canal bank in the study site is brown and has weeds growing in it that have recolonized after that. And if you look further down, deeper into the picture, you can see where the Bahia grass is, and you can still see that was treated in January. This photo is from April 20th. You can still see damage up the bank where the Bahia grass was treated with an herbicide. Just an example of what the project looked like, what one of the plots looked like before and after. This is a photo of the coverage plot from September 22nd, 2022. And then after that, this is what the grass looked like when it was treated with an herbicide. So you can see that damage really effectively killed the grasses in the project. And then went back and took photos of the condition of the site in late August of 2023. And this is outside of the canal study project. The study project is just down from this, but you can see what mechanical mowing and herbicide treatments can do to a canal bank. The lower section of this is primarily weeds. And again, just to note, this site has quite steep banks, so this is probably managed a little heavier than typical management. This is definitely managed differently. The measurement of plant height was intended to compare mature grass height of the native grass species against the control plot of unmown bahia to determine if mowing can be reduced or even eliminated potentially. And the project found that 2 of the 3 grass species, the seashore dropseed and the saltgrass, were both significantly shorter at maturity than the bahia grass was. The seashore paspalum was taller than the bahia grass in height. However, because it grows by those rhizomes and it was on a steep bank, as it grew down the bank, it aesthetically did not look as tall because it was laying down on the slope of the bank of the canal, and it appeared similar in height to the bahia grass. Percent coverage results. We were able to get percent cover results for 6 months. And after 6 months, all native grass species grown from the 4-inch plugs had a range of 60 to 75% cover. And this suggested, and you can see in the photo here what that looked like in some of those plots, this suggests that native grasses can compete against the weeds and can provide comparable coverage to bahia grass. I should note that any bare spot on the site, whether it was in the native grass plots or in the bahia grass plots, is an open spot where weeds will tend to colonize and grow. This spot was from September of 2022, this photo. And project results for below ground biomass. Our first below ground biomass measurement was taken 2 months into the study after the planting. So that's pretty early for these grasses to get established. But even within 2 months, we showed that only bahia grass pots at the higher elevation had significantly higher below ground biomass compared to the native grasses. And the rationale for that being at the higher elevation, we did at the higher elevation and the lower elevation, these measurements, was because those plants at the higher elevation are developing more dense and deep root systems to try and reach for water than those at the lower part of the canal bank. But this suggests, and this is a photo of one of the grasses, this suggests that native grasses can produce significant root systems to prevent erosion and to tolerate drought. And you can see this plant was grown in a 3-gallon pot, and its roots have reached the bottom. And in fact, the plant was growing out of the bottom drainage holes, and the grass was growing out of those drainage holes in the pot. And with that, I'll stop and take any questions.
Madam Chair, if I might, I wanted to alert you that Mr. Andy Hill joined us on Zoom shortly before noon, and he is here with us now.
Okay, Mr. Hill, can we do a mic check? Are you there? If you could unmute your mic, Mr. Hill.
That'll help. Good morning, everybody.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Yeah. Yes, you're good. Glad to have you join us and look forward to the rest of the meeting.
All right,
Okay.
let the okay, thank you.
Mhm. All right, Chad, you mentioned something in your presentation. I want to make sure I captured it correctly. You mentioned that weeds colonize and grow in the bare spots. So what you're saying, the opposite, if to a layman like myself, would be that if there are grasses that are healthy growing on the bank, weeds won't have an opportunity to colonize.
The healthy grasses and that cover helps outcompete the weeds. So even if weeds can get in, that doesn't mean that we will not have any weeds, but healthy coverage of grass is competition for those weeds and prevents them from getting established as well as they could in bare soil.
Did you evaluate the 3 test grasses with bahia grass for weed competition?
No, we did not. We were looking at percent cover as competition against the weeds when we started the study. So that's something that I would definitely look at, moving forward in the study. That was one limitation. We wish that we had the ability to start with sod. That would have given us an even starting playing field against the Bahia because it was sod. And I think that's something that to consider in the future, starting
As
with,
opposed to plugs, right?
yes, absolutely. And that way you don't have that open bare soil, and that way you get statistically comparable numbers there, because not starting out the same. So
Good point. Board members, do you have a question? Ms. McLeod?
A simple question. So where do we go from here?
Without making full recommendations on the next steps, this is a conversation, but looking at these species, identifying a grower who could grow these from sod. There are lots of sod growers. Sod growers typically grow Bahia grass because they can sell it. It's used all over the place. However, this is a shift in how we think and how we do and how we practice. It's a shift that really should happen. So identifying a grower who could produce these grasses in sod form and cut them with a professional sod cutter. And we have talked to growers who have said they've done this in the past, who are interested in trialing something like this. Doing another phase where we plant sod on the banks and seeing how they perform against Bahia grass and looking at potential reduction of mowing.
So continuing the study to find out what's the best to hold back the
Yeah,
bank now.
to stabilize the bank. Yes.
To stabilize the bank.
Ms. Smith?
Thank you for your report. The project challenges were really challenges. Take away the hurricane, the other two. So if you move forward, so is the study essentially done?
This funded study is completed. Yes.
Of the three, I mean, I don't even know if you can answer this. I mean, is there one that you'd choose over the other? Or do you like a combination, or is it you still have to study to make that recommendation? Or
I think there's still some questions we have. The seashore dropseed performed really well. It of the grasses, that's probably the one that we would recommend, but I still want to kind of consider the others, in a final formal recommendation. The rationale for planting them in different mixtures, some were mixtures of 2 and mixtures of 3 species, was to see when we have that competition, do they grow shorter? And when you get competition like that, all 3 grasses together, can we get the panicum or the Paspalum vaginatum? Will it grow shorter? And it did. It was shorter in those areas where it had competition from the native grasses. We also, with 3 grass species, there's some potential for resistance from if a disease were to come through and kill one species, or we would get all of the different ecological benefits of the 3. I think looking at it, we probably would not go with the 3 just because it's difficult to produce sod of the 3. So I think, we learned a lot from this, and I think the seashore dropseed identified itself as probably the potential grass to go with.
so visually, you want it shorter, and more uniform, or
That's a really good point. So we looked at this from a scientific standpoint, but aesthetics are really important because people see our canals and they want to see something that looks attractive. They don't want it to look messy. So the visual aspect, and you can see these grasses can be visually attractive. So yes, we did want to have some aesthetic benefits as well.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Waters?
Thanks, Chad. One of the things that kind of caught my eye is, look at this canal bank. It looks like a lake a developer would build in a new community. And one of the things that that ends up being a maintenance issue long term is, our water levels, particularly if you get away from the coast, will vary a couple feet from wet season to dry season. And so Bahia does a good job of basically growing down to that control elevation or the wet season water table elevation where water sits in the summer. But then, come May or June, that water's, 3 or 4 feet lower in elevation, so it may be 10, 12 feet down the bank, and you've got kind of this bare spot that as soon as it starts raining, it washes out. And so question is, are any of these, or are there other native plants we could look at that kind of might adapt their way down the bank and stabilize that bank so that you don't get those washouts at the start of wet season and you're not having to go back in and constantly maintain to kind of try and replace that bank slope and preserve that?
That's a great question. And I would say that I think all three of these grasses are adapted to those types of conditions. In terms of the Panicum vaginatum, we found it growing out into the water's edge, not clogging the canal, but growing out into the water's edge. These spread very rapidly by either on surface roots or underground tillers, and I can see them colonizing an area. And again, looking to nature, the Marco Island location there, it is damp soil where they happen to fence off, and again, within 2 months, it's colonized that entire area and looks like a lawn.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so something to look at moving forward might even be, the closer to the water's edge, plant these. And if people are going to have issue with aesthetics and we end up wanting to do some bahia, do that up higher in the bank where the clippings are less likely to get into the water body. And even if this the native stuff was a little bit taller down near the bank, it might almost block it from having that stuff get into the water body. So
yeah, that's a great point.
yeah, well, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent point that you brought up, because that would call for a linear plot parallel to the canal versus the AB system that you had outlined, right? Where it was side by side. So more of a parallel approach, and maybe that would be something to consider, especially with the one grass that I think it was the one that you said that grew 24 to 36, but it went and spread out versus tall. That's a habitat, probably provides some habitat as well. And that might be advantageous at the edge of the water, where you might have something. I don't know. I'm not the scientist. That's why you're here, Chad. But I visited the plots. I visited after you first installed these grasses and put the plugs in, and I saw your methodology in terms of what you were going for. I also came back and saw them after they had grown for a period of time and could tell them distinctly different. I mean, you could, the slides are good, but if you saw them in real life, they actually look different from each other. And I had just visited the site before Lisa had given me some other than good news, right, about it being mowed. So I wish that it could have continued to develop. But we'll look forward to hearing what you and the Basin team bring back in terms of to the board in terms of next steps and what you recommend.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Is there any public comment for this?
You have Mr. Hill. Wait.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Andy.
Chad, I may have missed your comment. I got in during the middle of your presentation. Did you comment on the potential filtration of the grasses as a way to filter out fertilizers, whatever it may be, coming from above the bank?
Thank you. That's a great question. And no, I did not mention that. But again, if you have that significant coverage, of that measurement of coverage is important, because if we have that coverage, those it's slowing the water down, slowing that's overland flow. So it's preventing erosion. We can slow it down and hopefully get it to percolate into the ground versus quick, fast overland flow, which picks up solid materials and carries them into the water bodies. So anything we can do to get this thick coverage like this to prevent that erosion from happening will prevent that non-point source pollution of erosion and potentially fertilizer into the canal or other pollutants.
Okay, briefly, I believe the water school is doing a study to something to that effect. The other thing is just a comment. I think it'd be great to move into the next phase of this, as I like to look at the financial aspects and not having to hire out the expensive mowing. And then the banks is certainly going to be a win, as well as the benefits that you have articulated very, very well. And just can't wait to get into then move forward with something in a pilot project on a larger scale. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. And I might add that that topic of environmental benefits has come up before. And I know that the Conservancy of Southwest Florida is a project underway with a consultant to develop measures that quantify environmental benefits. So I think it's still the end of December that they're shooting for it to be done. And it's quite timely then for this effort if we need to capture some of those intangibles. All right. And so everything kind of fits together. So hopefully that is still, and Michelle can correct me if I've got any of that wrong with public comment. Am I good, Michelle? Thank you very much. Public comment?
We have no registered speakers for this item.
Okay, thank you very much. And Chad, thank you so much for your partnership and the Botanical Gardens partnership and for being here today. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to the next item. It's the Picayune Strand Restoration Project update with Mr. Steve Basin with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And as you see today, I'm wearing my U.S. Army Corps of Engineer red, just in honor of you being here, Steve. And
I noticed that. Thank you very much.
And many may not know that you traveled from Jacksonville to be with us here today and to present this briefing. And he's a busy man, and I'm very honored that you're here today, Steve. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me here. And you guys listen to some very interesting topics. So I'm glad I came here today. So certainly the ones with the willows, that may be applied to one of my other projects, which is the Western Everglades restoration.
Well, you're welcome here anytime, Steve, but I know how busy you are.
Well, thank you. I will certainly need me looking at your agenda for in the future in advance. So thank you very much. Today here, I thought it'd be a good idea to just kind of recap some of the objectives for the Picayune Strand Restoration Project. It's a failed real estate development project. There were some canals excavated, 3 canals, and roads built in there. You can still see some of the scars from the roads on the map there that altered the way the water flows across the landscape. And those canals have a very detrimental effect, particularly in the dry season, because it can affect 1 to 3 miles away. It can start draining the groundwater in that area. So we're going to remove those canals and the roads. This will help restore the flow of water back across the landscape, which will add to the improving the recharge to the aquifer, where we get our drinking water. We'll still maintain the level of flood protection north of the Picayune Strand. That's the Northern Golden Gate Estates. And when we remove the effects of the canals, it will also remove the impact to the sensitive environmental areas that are surrounding the Picayune Strand area. And then with the canals removed, we have a point source now of fresh water that goes right into the 10,000 Islands in Florida Bay. So that alters the salinity levels. You get higher salinity levels outside of that area and more fresh water, more lower salinity levels where the fresh water is discharged. So this will help spread it back across the landscape and help stabilize those salinity levels in the estuaries. The last thing, it'll help the fire regime. You raise the groundwater back up, you kind of reduce the frequency, intensity of wildfires in that area. So we've been working on this for a while. We have completed a lot of construction out there. We have 3 pump stations that you could see kind of along the northern part, and the yellow up there, the Merritt Pump Station, Fauca Union Pump Station, and the Miller Pump Station. We've plugged the Merritt and the Prairie canals. Those are the ones on the, I guess I can show you with my cursor over here on the far east. These canals here have been plugged, including the stair steps here down here. And we've plugged the northern 3 miles of the Fauca Union Canal. And then so we're working here on the Southwest Protection Feature Levee and adding culverts here along US 41 and County Road 92. One we did just complete recently was the removal of the roads along the Miller Boulevard and Miller Canal. That was just recently completed. And so there's only one road that remains, and that's the Miller Boulevard that remains to be removed. And that will be removed in either 24 or 25 as we close out the project. As mentioned, we did complete the construction of the Miller Tram and Road Removal Project this past September with the help of our Chairman Roman out there to help us relocate some of the gopher tortoises that we had run across while we were out there doing the construction. So we basically took the roads, the east-west roads, and leveled them back out to the natural grade of the surrounding area. And so, again, I mentioned we've done the east-west roads. All of the roads now, 99% of the roads at Picayune Strand have been removed, with the exception of Miller Boulevard, which will be removed in 24 or 25. The ongoing construction that we have out there are associated with the Southwest Protection Features. This is the conveyance features, or culverts, as they're better known. This particular one is on the US 41. You can see the Tamiami Trail to the left or to the south. We're looking west, and that's the canal that runs parallel to the US 41. And right now we have stop logs blocking the entrance to the culvert until the project is complete and the Miller Canal has been plugged, and we're operating all 3 pump stations for restoration. It's allowing all of that water to flow back out across the landscape. The other 2, we've got a culvert that's there's an Indian village off of US 41, the Pam Hammock. We add an additional culvert there to convey water from the canal across the driveway there. And lastly, we have County Road 92, where we're going to install a culvert down there as well. Again, to pass these additional flows that we're anticipating once the canals are plugged and the pump stations are operating. And we do anticipate, so the US 41 culverts should be finished in December of this year, with the restoration of the traffic back on US 41. There's a bypass there now. And overall construction will be completed in June of 2024. This is the levee, the Southwest Protection Feature levee. This levee is on the east side of the agricultural farm out there, 6Ls, or Lippman Farms. And you're looking north on the levee here. So you have the canal that's adjacent to the left or to the west. That's a seepage canal. And then you can just see some standing water over there from the recent rainfalls to the east. It is a 7-mile levee, 7.2-mile levee. Again, I mentioned there is a conveyance canal that's adjacent to it to capture the seepage. And that does ultimately discharge out on the southern end down there near the Tamiami Canal. And we have another map that I'll get to here in a moment to show you how that flows out through the system. There's also culverts that we're installing here, culverts that go through the levee that send water to the forest, as well as to the south. There's some roads that cross the canal to convey the water across. So this kind of shows the overall progress of the restoration. So we're approximately 60% complete, and that's based on the plugging of the canals. So the light blue there is what has been fully restored. The green is partial restoration. Again, it kind of depends on the canals. We've plugged the northern 3 miles of the canals here. And then the yellow is not really receiving any of the benefits from restoration yet. And as mentioned, Miller Boulevard is still in place, does need to be removed, and will be removed in one of the subsequent dry seasons as we're moving forward. And some of the orange roads here are the tram roads. Those have also been removed. So the levees over here, that'll be finished in, that will also be finished in the June of 2024 timeframe. So what's left is the lower 5 miles of the Faka Union Canal to be plugged, as well as all the 12 miles of the Miller Canal and in the subsequent stair steps over here on the west side. All right, so I think I just kind of mentioned that. So we're completing the conveyance features, US 41 and County Road 92 culverts. And then the plugging of the Miller Canal and the Faka Union Canal and the removal of Miller Boulevard is the work that remains. So we have been attempting to not necessarily accelerate, but at least move things along quicker. That will enable us to complete the construction in 2025. So one of the things we've looked at was we did plug a portion of the Faka Union Canal earlier than anticipated. We do need, originally we thought we needed to have the entire levee constructed before we could plug any of the Faka Union Canal, but we did some modeling, we looked at that, and that allowed us to move forward with the 3 miles here. So some of the other things we're trying to do is be able to plug a portion of the Miller Canal in 24. That's this dry season. We've got some additional environmental assessments that we're doing. The NEPA analysis, that's the National Environmental Policy Act, that we have to look at how we impacting the environment, and in particular, endangered species that are out there. And so there is red cockaded woodpeckers out here on the kind of the northwest portion of the Bellmead and Picayune Strand area that they've asked us to do a forage analysis for, to include in our environmental assessment. And that the timeline is we're working very diligently to try to get that assessed. There's some intensive field work that has to be done to collect the information to put into this analysis. So that may prevent us from plugging the Miller Canal in 24, or at least a portion of it in 24. Again, I'm trying to position ourselves that where we can complete this project in 25. But in the event we're not able to, we'll move to the Miller Boulevard to remove that. And we'll be plugging all of Miller Canal in 25. So, okay, that concludes my presentation, I guess, pending any questions.
Thank you very much, Steve. I have a lot of questions. I'm sure the board does, but I asked Steve if he would specifically address the end of the Southwest Protection feature and the canal, and address how that water flows. Steve, could you do that for us?
Yes, ma'am. All right. I'm gonna have to reach over here. Yeah, I guess we were going to use, so that's the.
Thank you, Troy.
Thank you, Troy. Fantastic.
Okay, first tell us what we're looking at so everybody is on the same page.
All right, so let's see. This is the levee here that we're constructing. This is the Picayune Strand Forest over here. Tamiami Trail is down here. You can't really see a Tamiami Trail. And then this is the seepage canal that is adjacent to the levee. This is Tomato Road over here, and that's Lippman Farms out here to the northwest. And so the water, in the event the water does fill up, it will just begin to spread out back across the landscape and make its way over to the canal here. That's just south of the levee and the canal and the seepage canal. And as you may be aware, there are a lot of bridges and culverts under US 41 that convey the water across the road.
Okay, thank you for that, because sometimes when you think you've got a conveyance, you think that conveyance, continues to run. And I wanted to make sure that you showed this picture and explained it to us. So
Right.
thank you very
Yes,
much
ma'am.
for
Yes,
that.
ma'am. And now I'll just make one other point. Further up, you can't see it, but there is a culvert that goes through the levee that does allow water to go into to the forest. So not all of it is coming south into the terminus down here.
Okay, great. All right. So board members, any questions? I've got Andy Hill with his hand raised. Go ahead, Mr. Hill.
Hi there. A bunch of questions. I'm sure everybody's got a lot on their mind with this a huge project that's coming to a conclusion, which is great. Is there any way for you to measure the flows of water that will make it into the 10,000 islands and the Everglades National Park? That's been a big issue, obviously, that a lot of people are focused on, of restoring the sheet flow into the ecosystem and in the estuary. Is there any way for you to grade that over time?
That's a good question, Mr. Hill. I know we do have gauges throughout the system, and some of them are down there in the 10,000 islands. We'll also be measuring the salinity, so I'm hoping that may be kind of helping. I don't know where we can actually give you a number of the amount of water that flows down there, but we can certainly, we do certainly have gauges down there where we're monitoring the effectiveness of the restoration.
And then just a side question, which is outside of your presentation, which I understand, there's also a critter that you mentioned, I believe the woodpeckers as an issue. We also have one that wasn't invited to the Picayune Strand, which my friends that are python hunters are spend a lot of time in the area. And I don't know if you have any comment or a focus as to what we're going to do, or whether the Army Corps has any responsibility towards removing those pythons. But they love the area.
They do love the area, and I think one of the largest ones has been found in the Picayune Strand area, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of visibility on that. I know that we are doing lots of things out there to try to manage the number of pythons out there. And I guess the Water Management District is obviously instrumental in that as well.
Yes, but maybe there could be a way that there could be some joint funding to get more people out there and more resources in higher. A lot of people are studying it from an academic standpoint on a higher level. If we had more resources, possibly some from the Army Corps budget, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Other board members? Okay. If you could put one of the project slides on so that we have a picture of the project layout. Doesn't matter which one, just that's fine. The question that I have for you, Steve, I have a few just for clarification for our community. If you could point on this map where the culverts are under 41.
Right here.
Okay, so we see the end of the Southwest Protection Levee, and we just showed a real life aerial picture where that canal kind of disperses into that wetland area or to the landscape area. And then you had mentioned stop logs that are on the culverts right now. What is a stop log, and when does removal happen?
Good question.
If you can clarify that.
So I think, I think stop logs, they were logs back in the day. And I think they just kind of
Are boards now? Is that what it looked like?
they're aluminum now. They're aluminum panels
Okay.
that's secured to the structure there to prevent water from flowing through there. And that's on the upstream side where we put the stop logs. And they'll be removed once, so they're going to stay in place to prevent any of the water that may be high in phosphorus from getting into the Collier Seminole State Park at this time, until we have the restoration flows where we're pumping all three of the pump stations and allowing water. The water does flow from northeast to southwest to flow into this direction. That would help minimize any of the impacts from any of the high phosphorus to new areas. Like I said, there are lots of bridges and culverts currently under the road that is passing current flows into the Collier Seminole State Park. But then once we wanted to wait until we got the canals plugged and the pump station operating before we removed the stop logs.
Okay, and that would be at the end of the project's completion, right?
Yes, ma'am. That'll be
Okay.
one of the last things we do.
One of the last things you do. Okay, so thank you for that clarification. Now, Miller Boulevard, I understand there's a utility use for Miller Boulevard. Is that correct for the construction folks or no?
Not anymore.
Okay, not anymore.
Right.
So you're
Since
waiting.
we've completed the Miller Tram and Road Removal Project.
Okay, that's an important clarification. And why are you waiting to the very end to remove it?
Well, there was some thought we may need it when we plugged the canals. However, I guess we've determined that we don't need the road in place to plug the Miller Canal.
Mhm.
So and we had some challenges with the contractor. So we did consider including it into the existing contract. However, we decided not to help them get across the finish line. And that's something that our heavy equipment program can manage.
Okay, so
remove
the
the
U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Heavy Equipment Team is going to not only plug the Miller Canal, but also remove Miller Road.
That's correct. Yes.
Oh, that's good. These folks are really rock stars. The heavy equipment team from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are really rock stars. They belong to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and therefore they're not dealing with a contractor. So they just get out there and get the job done. They're phenomenal, and I've been appreciative of everything they've contributed. The rest of the FAC Union Canal, what's the plan for plugging the remainder of it?
January of 2024, right after Martin Luther King's Day, we'll be out there. We've already got the equipment on order, so they'll be delivered then. And then we'll start moving at 92nd is where we are now. This is like 64th is up here where the tieback levee is. So we've already plugged the upper 3 miles.
Right.
So we'll start at 92nd. We'll have 18 people out there. So this is the most people we've ever had out there from our heavy equipment
Wonderful.
programs. We'll have several crews. Again, we're going to start on 92nd. And now the current thinking is there's an area along 100th to 114th that hasn't been cleared. So we'll add, we have gone out there in advance. Some of the things we've been doing to try to expedite the completion was clear the vegetation. There's vegetation on the spoils from the excavation of the canal. They placed it on the side. That has to be removed prior to placing the material in the canal. We're using the existing material or the former material. And so they'll be out there clearing that one spot that had to be left in place. There was a red-shouldered hawk that was nesting in there, so we had to go around it. And then, so they'll be clearing that area, and then still trying to determine whether we want to come to the southern end, like 128th, and work north as well. But we're going to utilize the crews that we have there to complete the Faka Union Canal in 24, weather permitting, of course. We are kind of limited to the dry season. So as long as it's a typical dry season, we shouldn't have any problems with completing the Faka Union Canal in 24.
And is that the U.S. Army Corps Heavy Equipment Team completing the plugging of the FAC Union Canal?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and that's great. And the Miller Canal is already, the spoils are pre-positioned for plugging throughout the whole canal or just portions of it?
That's correct. We've completed the clearing of the Miller Canal last year.
Okay, so that's ready to go for the dirt to be pushed in once we got that levee to a certain point where we can do it.
That's right.
Okay, so tell me the good news about the levee, since we've had one of the driest wet seasons in a long time here in Southwest Florida. And the southern part of that levee is wet for the most part and usually impacts their ability to work. But this year, we are extremely dry. So how many lifts do we have and how's your progress been?
Progress has been going very well, very well. Yes, as you're aware of, we were impacted the year before last with the high waters. They couldn't work on the southern end. And so now we have 4 lifts across the entire site, 4 out of 6. There's going to be 6 total lifts. Each lift turns out to be, after it's compacted, about 9 inches. So altogether, the levee will be about 4.5 feet high. We have 4 lifts across the entire site. And we'll be adding, we're working, now they're working on the northern end and working their way south, placing the 5th and 6th lifts as they move it out through the site. So 4 lifts is certainly high enough that they did take advantage of the dry season. Should they get any kind of appreciable rain, they should still be able to continue to work because it is up elevated now. It's up high enough. And so they are working 4th and the 5th lift. Now there may be some changes in the event that they need to get to the southern end and come back north. But more or less their current plan is to go from north to south, completing the 5th and 6th lifts.
So the Corps can plug the FACA Union Canal or finish plugging the FACA Union Canal while the contractor is still adding lifts to the levee, and the miller's got to wait, right? The Miller Canal work's got to wait.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So, as I mentioned, we're trying to at least get a portion of the Miller Canal plugged. And then, well, certainly the plugs that we have to put in where the levee is, the yellow, the solid yellow line there, that's the levee, the tieback levee. That's all of this is kind of one elevation here. And that's why we call it the tie, but it ties back to the elevation over here and over here.
Mm-hmm.
And to put the plug in at the levee is an engineered plug. So in other words, we have to have special material, a certain kind of material, sand, and it has to be compacted and tested to make sure we have the right compaction and density of the material for that particular plug. And then the one that's on the spreader basin, the southern end of the spreader basin. And then we fill in the gap there. So those two take a lot more time, a lot more and some precision to build as opposed to the plugs that are using the existing material. So the goal or the desire is to at least get those 2 plugs, because they can take a month to 6 weeks, 1 to 2 months to build those 2 particular plugs. If we could get those in place, that would put us in a very good position to complete the project in 25, working south on the remaining plugs. And so again, the thoughts are that the canal will remain in place. Most of the canal will remain in place in this next wet season. And so we would be working in the dry season here to plug the Miller Canal. And then the levee is scheduled to be completed this dry season. So June, July of 24 is when the levee should be finished. The entire levee should be finished. So the dry season of 24, the levee will be finished, and that should reduce the risks of any impacts to this area with the canal still in place.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate how you're really working to do several things at the same time and then bringing them together, hopefully to a completion. Because I'm really looking forward to this project being completed. It was one of the original SERP projects that was authorized in 2001. And it is going to be a great day when it crosses the finish line. And I'm going to be so excited in early 2025, hopefully, that when this is done, because it's going to be great. Now, one of the challenges that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is experiencing, and I share this with them each time that I'm out there, is because some of restoration is happening. It's making it a very desirable place for a lot of these species that have not been out there. So the longer this goes on, right, the more species are moving in. like the red cockaded woodpecker. And then the Corps has to do additional work to get the habitat permits or whatever permits are necessary to continue their work. So the quicker we get it done, wildlife can all return at the same time, and we won't be slowed down by that. But it's a great restoring 55,000 acres in eastern Collier County to its natural state. I mean, that is awesome. And the sooner we get it done, the sooner we'll be experiencing those benefits. And so I appreciate the Corps' work on this. Let's see if there's any public comment on this.
Madam Chair, we have two registered public speakers for this item, Michelle Arquette Palermo, and then she will be followed by Sean Clem.
Right.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Steve, for that wonderful presentation. Michelle Arquette Palermo on behalf of the Conservancy of Southwest Florida and the 65 members who support our mission. The Conservancy has been involved in Picayune Strand since the beginning, even before it was an official CERT project. And of course, we're all excited that we're getting closer to the finish line. However, our concern about the lack of a water quality treatment does grow. We appreciate the district's hard work in obtaining the feasibility study to prevent various solutions. However, it is time for the next step. We urge DEP and the South Florida Water Management District to formally adopt a water quality treatment strategy to address the existing and future impacts of nutrient pollution in the downstream OFWs and estuarine resources. The state of Florida, through Governor DeSantis' executive orders 1912 and 2306, has recognized the critical importance of our water resources to the state's environment, economy, and quality of life. Addressing the pollution at the source is critical, and the Conservancy would like to better understand what strategy the district has in play so we can weigh in on the best solution for addressing water quality. We agree there is no easy or perfect solution. Our staff is currently reviewing the feasibility study again to see if there are parcels within the study area that may be useful for a public-private partnership moving forward. We bring this issue to your attention in the hope that additional information can be made available for a plan that ensures an effective solution is designed to protect our water, land, and wildlife. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michelle.
Your final speaker for this item is Sean Clem.
Thank you. Sean Clem with Audubon, Florida. I'm here to speak on behalf of my colleagues on Audubon Florida's policy team on this project. Audubon remains supportive of completing the Picayune Strand Restoration Project by the 2025 target and is appreciative of the Corps' efforts recently to advance the schedule on the Miller Tram and road removal and the Southwest Protection Feature to help make that 2025 target realistic. Audubon has not received any updates on addressing the water quality issues around the Tam Tam monitoring station and south of Lippman Farms. While considerable effort was invested in identifying prime locations for building STAs and treatment facilities, land has not been acquired. Audubon has been concerned about one useful location, Section 29, which was supposed to have an easement for mitigating Fiddler's Creek last phase of construction. However, that easement was not enforced, and now there's a proposal to build some 900 residential units there. Audubon has opposed this, but urges the district and Corps to collaborate with DEP to urgently pursue options for water quality treatment in this region before the Miller pump is turned on. Thank you for what has been done up to this point, including strong involvement by Chair Roman.
Thank you, Dr. Clem. Any other public comment?
We do not, Madam Chair.
Any other board comments or questions? Steve, thank you so much and really appreciate you being here today. And I'm looking forward to getting out in the field with you. If you're not down from Jacksonville, your crew out there, your chief engineer out there to see the work that's being done in January.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much, Madam.
Thank you. All right, let's take a short break, about 10 minutes. So about 7 minutes. Let's reconvene at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Madam Chair, you have a live mic.
Thank you very much, Troy. Let's go ahead and reconvene. And that brings us to our update on the regional model development and comprehensive hydrologic and restoration corkscrew watershed initiative study. Akin, I can't even pronounce this. It's so hard. Oh my gosh.
It's going to be a lot of work.
It's going to cost a lot of money, right? Akin, it's wonderful to have you. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Akin Owoshina, and with my colleague Kim Fikowski, we'll be giving you an update on the various initiatives we're undertaking at your direction to comprehensively look at restoration of corkscrew watershed. I was last here in April of this year at your board meeting to give you the initial update on the various initiatives that were going on. And the first 4 slides of my presentation, I linked to that presentation to kind of tie everything together. Between my presentation in April and today's update, my colleague, Brad Jackson, I think gave you an update about 2 meetings ago. So I'm going to try to tie everything together to bring us all up to the same page. And then I'll focus on the development on the modeling, and Kim will talk to you about the restoration project. Okay. So first, for background and context, there have been many studies in this area. There have been several flood studies, including the 2018 level of service study that my team worked on. We do 5-year periodic water supply update that includes modeling and includes this area. You've received updates from the team from the district on that. And there have been ecological and environmental studies in this area as well, including a recent one completed by the Audubon team, where looking at historic data at lettuce lakes, they identified a change in hydro period and brought their concerns to you. You funded some work, asked staff to work with the Audubon team, the corkscrew team, to do some modeling of that area, which they completed and presented to you. And you indicated the interest of the board in comprehensively addressing the situation. You charged staff with engaging with the Audubon team, and we have been working on that. We're approaching a milestone for what I shared with you in April, and the update today will be on a couple of those milestones. Today's presentation is the third. When I used the slide first, it was the first, and there have been 2 things. But before we get into the presentation, I thought I'll share this slide again, because many of us, when we talk about corkscrew, sometimes we have slightly different images in our mind. Dr. Clem today talked about the corkscrew sanctuary. And she also used the word crew. And so just want to make sure everybody was plugged in, that the larger watershed includes 5 hydrologic units: Flint Pen Strand, Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, Bird Rookery, and the other 2 that I've listed in there, including Camp Keys and the Marsh. All of these are inside the corkscrew watershed, and we'll talk about a comprehensive study. We'll be looking at all of these and the areas around them. The next step that I identified at the time in April included these 5 bullets. For today's presentation, I will be focusing on the ongoing activities, and we'll be telling you about some of the steps we're taking towards initiating the public planning process, which is scheduled to start in January of 2024. I had shown you these bullets with the check marks for the activities that were completed. The key item for today, if you'll notice, there is a blue right towards the bottom third of the page that says spinning up, is the initiation of the regional comprehensive corkscrew study. To start the project in 2024, there are a number of things we need to get moving on now. And so Kim will be talking to you about those in a short while. The last slide, I think, from my April presentation was what to expect going forward. And for today's presentation, I'm going to be focusing on what we are doing with regards to the tool development, getting the modeling tool ready for application. And Kim will be talking to you about the public planning project itself. But the items on this slide, we have completed, or we have been engaging with potential partners on the work that's going to happen with this study. We've been talking about the budgeting. I think we've secured funding for the current year's work. You've approved funding for us to move forward. And we've initiated the staffing, including selecting a great project manager for the study. We're having the ongoing discussions about how we'll get this work done. We will also continue our commitment to give you periodic updates. Okay. All right, I'll focus on the modeling at this point. One of the big things that we focused on when you first told us you were interested in having a comprehensive look at Corkscrew was making sure we had a tool that was sufficient to do the work. The tool had been initially recommended by the level of service study to be expanded. When we did the level of service study in 2028, the Mike Shee platform we used was the 2014 platform, and we updated that to 2022 platform. The study at the time recommended a number of things, including expanding the model domain in these areas. You'll see the old, on the image to your right, the old model footprint is in pink, and the new model footprint is in red. And the recommendation of the level of service study was to, one, expand the model so that it could better represent the coastal part of the system, but also to better cover the entire Big Cypress watershed, which is to expand the model to the eastern side. And that's critically important for this particular project. And Troy, you said something that you shouldn't have, but so one of the important parts of this, and I'll try to outline this very closely.
You got to be on the mic.
You bring your mic over. Yeah.
Just
So-
swing it over.
I made a quick outline here. One of the big pieces of this enhancement we did was the area sketched out there essentially is a very rough drawing around the Corkscrew watershed or the Corkscrew system. And you'll notice that with this new model, with the expanded boundaries, we can now represent that full system. And this overcomes one of the major limitations of the previous tools that have been used to try to answer questions in this area. So take that off now. Thank you, Troy. All right. But in addition to that, we updated a lot of the data that was the underpinning of the model. We updated the topographic information with a new digital elevation model pulled from new LiDAR. We took advantage of modeling that's been done by Audubon and the Central and Heartland NEP, and we incorporated the new findings they had into the model that we're developing. We're focusing on calibrating that model for potential possible uses. And earlier on in one of the slides, I told you there had been many studies done in the area in the past. One of the limitations of those studies is that they were single purpose studies. We had flood studies, and they used short-term models that could look at an event. We had ecological studies. They look at long-term studies that could come up with hydro periods. But those used two slightly different tools. We wanted to make sure that for this particular study, we ended up with a model that was calibrated consistently and could look at the flood questions and the restoration questions, water supply questions within the same tool. So that's ongoing with this particular model development. And post the development, there are some purposes or some uses other than this study that we've lined up as a recommendation of the level of service, earlier level of service work. But the tool, once complete, will be available for just several things. That moved very fast. Could you put me back in, please? No, I think I might have. Yeah. I can show it from here. I'll just put it back. Okay. Apologize. That was okay. Once complete, the tool will be used for several studies in the area, and we're looking forward to having its completion. So this is the schedule that we're working off of, and I'll toggle off the next two slides. This pictorial view kind of shows the path from setting up the model, something that started in March of 2022, and is scheduled to be complete now in May. Now, this is a little bit delayed past the schedule we presented to you previously, and this is about a month or two later. But I want to make sure that you're aware that this wouldn't in any way delay its use for the comprehensive study. The model at the end of calibration will be ready for use, and that's scheduled to happen in the February timeframe now. February will be way early. We won't be doing modeling yet on the comprehensive study in the February timeframe. So we're still on track to have this tool ready for the comprehensive study when we're about to do it. We've completed most of the data collection activities, the original model development, the calibration strategy. We have done a fair amount of the work on the long-term simulation calibration, and we're fairly advanced in the event simulation calibration, looking at Hurricane Irma and similar storms. But we can't make either of those complete until both are complete, because changes we make during the short-term calibration will make us go back to check what's happening with the long-term calibration. But we feel very confident by February, we'll be done with both calibrations. The model will be ready or fit for use, and we'll be able to put it to use in the study when we choose to. I mentioned there were a few other things that are in our current scope for that model. We intend to update. With the updated model, we intend to rerun the various design storm events that were used in the level of service program. And while that is within the current scope for the model development, it doesn't preclude the use of the model for other studies once we get to the deliverable in February of this year. And that was the same material that I think I have in text on this slide. I think I've spoken to most about all of that. And at this point, unless you want to ask any questions now or after Kim's presentation, I'll be happy to turn this over to my colleague, Kim Fikowski. Kim, for those who don't know Kim, Kim is a lead project manager with the Water Management District. She's a certified environmental professional, has worked in the area in regulatory and ecological restoration for over 30 years. 12 of those have been with the district. And Kim, in her role with the district as a project manager, has led similar studies to this. And we feel very, very lucky to have her skills and experience to help get this project off the ground. Kim?
Thank you, Akin, and good afternoon. Excuse me. Good afternoon, everyone. We have officially named this project the Corkscrew Watershed Initiative, CWI, to make it a lot easier than the title of the presentation.
I can pronounce that one.
Okay. The Corkscrew Watershed Initiative will support the BCB mission by focusing on selecting a series of projects that will increase natural water storage and moderate flooding, restore and protect historic flows as practicable, while minimizing impact to property owners and meeting the water supply and water management needs of the Corkscrew watershed. Note that I said a series of projects because in the 30 years I've been working on hydrological and ecological restoration projects, very seldom has one project solved the restoration issue. So we'll be looking for a series of projects and to sequence those projects in the correct order so that we can have a successful outcome. We're currently developing the scope of work and selecting our district and consultant project development team, who will then reach out to key stakeholders with expertise in the Corkscrew watershed to develop a technical working group that will assist the district and consultant project development teams. Excuse me. We want to approach this as a public planning process, as Akin said, with extensive partner and public engagement so that we select projects for implementation that have stakeholder support. As Akin said also, we are budgeted for this project. The comprehensive hydrological monitoring and ecological restoration will begin in early 2024 and wrap up in late 2026. In addition to numerous public meetings that we will be planning, we'll also be updating the BC board periodically. A little bit about how we'll proceed with this study. Our district and consultant project development team and technical working group will conduct a literature review to ensure that we're using all of the available resources and to identify any data gaps or needs that we may need to fill. Next, we'll determine our goals and how to meet and measure our success, how we'll measure our success. And from that, we'll generate a list of projects with public input. Then our teams will look at the list of projects and select several projects to move forward, the ones that meet our goals of the project. We're hoping to be able to identify with stakeholder support some low-hanging fruit projects that we could advance immediately. Our team will refine the selected projects with 1 or 2 rounds of modeling, and then we'll conduct preliminary engineering and cost analysis of the projects to ensure they meet both the ecological and economic criteria sufficient to justify the investment in the projects. Then our teams will sequence those projects to ensure that we meet the short and long-term goals. And finally, we'll generate a tentatively selected plan to recommend to the BCB board so that the projects may move forward for funding and authorization by the various agencies and governments that will design, construct, and operate the projects. So with that, any questions for myself or Akeem?
Thank you both for your presentations. Board member questions? Go ahead, Ms. Smith.
For Akeem, so this kind of, to me, it goes full circle to what Lisa talked about, resiliency. I mean, it's really very broad. What can I expect, or what can the public expect in your January report? Like what, and modeling?
So for the modeling, what you'll get isn't going to be very exciting. It will be a tool ready to use. No results yet. It will just be a tool that's been calibrated. And for the geeks like me, the closeness of the calibration to measure data will be exciting. How robust it is at looking at long-term events and reproducing an event like Irma may be exciting. But to most folks in the public, it's not really, the meat isn't there yet.
Okay.
I think when the study actually starts is when we'll get into things that would maybe engage people more, when we start talking about what we could do, what are the problems that we see in Corkscrew and what we could do to fix it. But to be able to answer those questions well, we need to have a tool that the various partners are comfortable with, which is the work we're doing now. And we can shift our focus from discussing the tool to looking at the outcome of the tools and what it means with regards to restoring the system.
So it's the mechanism to get to the result. So is it hard to change that once you have a tool established? It's a process.
Yes, it's a process. And with tool development, it's an ongoing process. The key is to get to a good endpoint where we're sufficiently comfortable with the tool to apply to this study. I imagine that we'll gather more data over the next year or two, and we'll update the tool again. I keep telling Lisa about this, so she has to budget for ongoing tool development or updates. But the idea is we feel that by the January, February timeframe, we'll have a well-calibrated tool. It would have been reviewed by our staff, my staff in Palm Beach, some of our partners who have modeling resources, and that we'll all be confident that the tool is sufficient to start being applied to this important study that you want us to do.
Okay. And then Kim, for your technical working group, what type of expertise do you put together for that group?
Well, what we're looking for, people with expertise in the Corkscrew watershed. So I'm looking at Sean Clem. I'm thinking that, the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary is definitely, a partner that we'd like to bring in for a technical working group. This impacts Collier and Lee County. And so I'm assuming we may have partners brought in from Lee and Collier, as well as City of Bonita Springs, and then other NGOs and other individuals that have expertise in the Corkscrew watershed.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah. So Akeem, as part of this, we've got better information. Things have changed since we did the level of service study. Is one of the things that's going to result of this an update to that level of service study that was already done, or?
Yes.
Okay, good.
The plan we have is to revisit each basin in the district every 8 to 10 years.
Okay.
And the timing of this tool development is perfect. We finished in 2018. It kind of sets us up to get to that. Yeah.
Gotcha. Good. And then, so kind of as I understand it, we get the calibrated model done, then you can start pulling levers and say, okay, if we, if we implement this project or this project, here is the result, and decide what's worth doing. So what are the kinds of things that you think you'll look at? Is it going to be trying to incentivize water users to use less, to go to different aquifers, operate structures differently, and see how we can operate them differently and not have adverse impacts on people? Like what are the sorts of things we would look at in terms of projects once we have the calibrated model done and can evaluate these things?
So that would depend on which study we apply it to. For the comprehensive study and level of service, it will be a little bit different. The level of service is focused on flooding. And so we'll be looking at changes to the primary system, the system that the district operates.
Mm-hmm.
And this I mentioned earlier that we're making some improvements at some structures. Some of these were recommendations from the earlier level of service study that finished in 2018. Kent in the room actually put in this current scope the rerun of the various storms and sea level rise that were done in that level of service study. So I think at the end of the current contract with his consultants, he'll be able to tell right away if there's been a difference from the results we had previously, and we need to revisit any of the earlier recommendations. But subsequently, when we come back into the system, we'll be working with the resiliency folks. We'll be putting in future rainfall, which we didn't have at the time when we did the original study. And we'll be looking to see if there is another suite of recommendations to your capital program in the future. For the comprehensive study, we have some ideas, but the beauty of the public planning process is that we hope to further develop those ideas with input from partners and the public. But we expect that there will be projects that either hold more water in the corkscrew area, but more importantly, doesn't result in shedding of that water into communities like Bonito Springs that's downstream of corkscrew at a time that's disadvantageous for flooding. Mm-hmm. So there'll be projects like that. There'll be maybe water retention projects that could affect the hydro period. There might be some that have to do with water use, but we hope all of this will come out of that public planning process. We'll tee everything up on the table, and hopefully we'll be able to screen some and ultimately model some of the ideas that come up.
Okay, so basically essentially the working group will help bring projects to you that they think are reasonable, and then we evaluate them for the CWI part of this.
Yeah, as well as, having public meetings so that we can get input from the public, maybe things we haven't even thought about. And then we can look at them all, and then we'll have to, do evaluations and then select those that actually meet the project goals.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you don't have anything? Okay. Akeem, can you summarize in a way that the public can understand what a model is and what a tool is? Because I think we kick these around like they're just, a hammer that we get out of the toolbox, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. It's a very complex thing that we use to do hydrology.
Yeah. So the trying to make it sound like a hammer is actually an intentional thing, because many times when you talk about a model, people's eyes glaze over and they think there is something particularly special. And we would like people to look at this purely as a tool to do analysis. The key is that it's a very complicated tool. It's a tool that allows you to simulate what the system response would be to different drivers. In this case, you put in rainfall, you put in evapotranspiration, physical processes that happen, withdrawal of water from the ground, building of physical features like canals or levees or berms. And this tool allows you to simulate the physics of how the water moves around and how the system might respond. And if you do it right, you'll train the model with some actual measured data sets. And that tells you that the model is now able to represent those what was observed with those data sets. And then you take a second data set that the model has not seen before, and you use the model to predict how the system would respond. And that process that you call validation or verification of the model tells you how good the model is at predicting something it did not know. And if it does well enough in both, then you feel comfortable that you can rely on the model for making predictions when you put in projects or ideas that come up as part of your study. So it is complicated. It's a very it requires some fair amount of skill set to be able to master the development of the tool. But what we're partly hoping is that once we can get past confidence in the tool and rely on its outcome, then it becomes it becomes a purely planning process where we have confidence and faith that the tool will represent what might happen. And the rest of it is a combination of hopefully good engineering, some common sense, and willingness to talk through and move from old myths and actually be willing to, look at different ways of doing things to solve problems. But yeah, we intentionally try to demystify the modeling part of it.
Well, I think that description that you just gave was outstanding. I think that you simplified it enough where we understand the complexity, or at least I do. When you say that you train the model, is there an artificial intelligence portion to that model?
Not in these ones. Now we're exploring different ways of using AI and machine learning in some of our modeling. Now there are some automated parts. Yeah, there's it's called, the acronym is PEST. It's parameter estimation, where you could use the power of computers to try to do the calibration and search for correct parameters. We use some of that in calibration, not so much in this particular model because it's very large and takes a fair amount of time to run. But not for any of the models we're putting into production right now. We're not using artificial intelligence or machine learning in any of these production tools, but we're looking at ways of leveraging them to make our models better.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. Any other board member questions? Are there any comments from the public?
We do have one registered public comment. Sean Klim.
Thank you again. Sean Clem, Audubon, Florida, Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to hear this and to see us moving forward on this. Audubon's really grateful for the focus that the district has made by initiating this project, and we really look forward to continuing to work with Akin and his team, with the Basin team, providing data and using, helping provide the science to support, this science-driven initiative. We look forward to, participating as part of that working group, and we're just grateful for the partnership and the support that we've had so far, and look forward to moving forward together, both with the district, team in West Palm and the Basin team here in Naples. We're particularly grateful to the board for your support on this, and Chairman Roman, the way you've driven this project and kept the focus and tasked the team with this. I think we're doing the right thing. We're protecting something that's really critical for Collier County long term, and I think I'm just glad we're in the place we are right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any Zoom comments or public comments?
No, we have no hands raised at this time.
Right. I'm very excited about this. I mean, this has been a long time coming, and it started on a conversation about hydrology for Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary and nesting wood storks. And maybe a little bit before that conversation started. But to look at the work that you've done, to now look at a comprehensive model so that we can address the whole watershed is just incredible. And I'm looking forward to those future updates. And I'm sure we all agree that it's going to be something special when it's done. And so thank you for your hard work. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to board comment. This is a time when we get to talk with each other and share anything that we'd like with each other as the board. So I'll just go ahead and ask for any board comments. We'll begin with you, Michelle.
Okay. I just wanted to thank Brad Jackson and the team at Merritt Pump Station. That was Mike Perry and Adam Kennard for giving me the time to show me around that pump station and the surrounding areas. I really appreciate them being very patient with me as I asked hundreds of questions, but it was very beneficial just to get a lay of the land and a better understanding of our projects. So I'm very grateful to them, and I look forward to getting out more to seeing our projects. Thank you.
Great. So you were already at the Picayune Strand when you had Steve now come and present the whole thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Good.
That's super.
My first time out there was back in 2016. And so that's about 7 years ago. So it was good to get back out there, see what developments, developments have been made since then. So it was very exciting.
Great, great. Vice Chair Waters,
Nothing for me.
Ms. Smith?
Nothing for me, except I look forward to doing on-site visits as well. I think the visual and the being on site is very helpful, but otherwise, thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go to the Zoom board members. Mr. Hill?
Hey, just want to let you know, I gave up fishing early today to get back to meet with everybody, at least in telephonically. The only thing that we've been that I'm wondering about is the culverts under 41. Lisa Keeler and I have been discussing the possibility that some of them may be clogged. And we were strategizing as to who's responsible and how to go about getting that, because it's that's a key part of allowing the flow underneath 41 to the 10,000 Islands is a key part of the Picayune Strand restoration. It's kind of funny where you have $1 billion project and a couple culverts could be curtailing the significant portion of the benefits. And another thing that I've been wondering about is like the new property that the Water District acquired near the intersection of 41 and 29. There seems to be a heck of a lot of water that appears to be trapped to the east and north and not being able to flow into the Everglades National Park. It'd be neat if somebody's a heck of a lot smarter than me could do some modeling to see if in fact my perception has any validity. So those are the things that I'm wondering about. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, and we're glad that you're joining us today. There's a lot of moving pieces with some of the discussions with the culverts under 41 and a lot of adjacent issues. So keep voicing them, keep sharing them with Lisa Keeler, because there's a whole pile of them that we're taking a look at. Mr. Romano.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just it was very great to hear all the great projects going on to improve water quality and the environment in our neck of the woods. Thank you again.
Thank you. I wanted to highlight just how great it was to have all of the board members out in the field sharing our success with completion of the Cypress 1 structure and our ribbon cutting. It's been a long time coming. It was just a great event and everything. And hats off to the district team and the Basin team who worked together to make that possible. And I'd like to make a special mention to Ashi Apuji for his work with getting that project to completion as well. As you know, that the county is expanding Vanderbilt Beach Road. We had an old structure there in a different location, and the road was going to interfere with that, or our structure was going to be in the way, whatever. But we were able to partner with the county, move our structure, accelerate the timeline, and it's now completed and ready to go. And what's so significant about that new structure, it's fully automated. And you saw how far it was that we had to drive to get there. So now we'll be able to be more responsive with our gate operations for flood protection. And Andrew Wolf's guys won't have to drive after they get the call all the way out there, move the gate and drive all the way back. So that's a good thing. And the local community will benefit by having additional flood protection for their area that has experienced localized street flooding in the past. So all good. Thanks for being there. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule so that we could all be there together. And Lisa Keeler's had a banner week. She's not only had that ribbon cutting, she's had a birthday in between and has a board meeting. So a belated Lisa, happy birthday. And you have a great celebration of this week once it's done, because you've certainly earned it.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll go on to the next item on our agenda, which is our technical reports. And we'll go with Andrew Wolf in the field station report.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Wolf, the superintendent of the Big Cypress Basin Field Station. And I'm here to give a report on our field station operations and a 3-month look ahead at our maintenance activities.
I know it's kind of a broken record, but we've been working diligently on getting vegetation out of our canals, which is a nonstop project. This is the I-75 canal, and we have two of our conver boats in the left-hand picture there, pushing the debris and the vegetation over to the long arm track hoe, which scoops it out. This is just an ongoing vegetation removal. It's always a battle year round with the vegetation to keep it down and keep the canals flowing. We did some tree removal on Airport Road. We had a couple trees that were ready to fall in the canal, so we removed them. And on the C1 connector, a couple of trees went down during a small storm, so we pulled those out just to keep the flow. Maintenance activities, did some gearbox preventive maintenance at Coco 1 on the left with the Dre Touche. And then on the right is Michael doing some actuator repairs at Coco 2. We cleared some vegetation and the canal banks up at Golden Gate, Maine. This was north of Oil Well Road, just to give us better access into the canal and to make it easier maintenance the canal bank. Just some regular maintenance is we change out our boat barriers every so often, just because they get out in the sun all the time. They get faded, they crack, and sometimes they sink. So we put in new ones every so often, usually about every 5 years, just so it keeps it safe for boaters and anyone else in the canal. And the 3-month look ahead, be removing vegetation debris from the canal. Our structure maintenance will still be doing preventative maintenance on the structures, and our SIP repairs, which is our structure inspection program. The list, what the structure inspection program is, last fiscal year, engineers came out to about half of our structures and did inspections. And they create a list and prioritize it by critical down to basically minor repairs. And then the list just dropped this week. So we have basically until next October to fix these repairs. Luckily, there was very few critical repairs, and those have already been taken care of. So we have a lot of, I believe, like 160 repairs to do, but a lot of them are very minor, and a lot of them have been done already on a regular maintenance cycle. And then the system operation will be transitioning into the dry season operation. For our comprehensive Everglades restoration project, we're doing our contractors are mowing the levees, and on the right-hand picture is contractor mowing the manatee mitigation area. The Miller Tree project, which I kind of highlighted in the last board meeting on the left, forestry has asked us to install some gates to keep the public from driving on the right-of-ways and camping out there. So we installed 2 gates for forestry. That's on the right-hand picture. Pump station maintenance. We've completed preventative maintenance at the pump stations. Contractor installed LED lights at the Faka Union pump station, both interior and exterior, which definitely enhances safety for night shifts and also cuts down the electric bill. We replaced a defective fuel valve at the Miller pump station. And we're continuing training 3 new employees on pump operations. One of the hazards of working at the pump station, this rattlesnake was found inside the Miller or Faka Union pump station. That's just one of the dangers working out there. You have to be very aware whenever you're working outside the pump station, or even on the lower levels of the pump station, for any wildlife. Nothing happened with the snake. They got it outside the door and let it free again. So, but it's just one of the hazards of working out there in the Picayune. 3-month look ahead, we'll respond to dry season pump orders. With the Corps moving ahead with plugging Miller Canal, we have 2 new positions for the Miller pump stations that's going to be coming up. We're hoping they get advertised in the next 2 weeks here, because they have to be in place and trained by wet season next year, which is a little quicker than we thought, but hopefully we can get them filled and get them in position. And then we're also preparing, there's one last pump at Merritt Pump Station that we're going to replace the pump shaft in. So we'll be tearing that down starting in the next few weeks here. And then continue training the new pump station employees, hopefully the 2 new ones at Miller. And with that, any questions?
Are there any board member questions? Are there any public comments?
I have none.
Andrew, I just want to say that you and your team are doing a great job out there. And anyone who looks at the Picayune Strand and sees how beautiful it is out there would love to work at the Miller Pump Station. I mean, it is a nature's paradise out there.
Yes, it is.
So it's just finding the right folks, and you've been doing a great job with your recruiting. So keep up the good work.
I appreciate it.
That brings us to the water conditions report with Brad Jackson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. It's a pleasure to be here in person this time around. I was virtual last time, but it's nice to be here in person and be able to present your water conditions since that last board meeting. So I'll just jump into it here. I've got our summary here for the the calendar year. The overall story that pretty much I'm going to be talking about this time around is how dry it's been. I think everyone knows how dry we've had it this wet season, and I'll just go through some of the statistics to kind of highlight that. So you've got on the screen here, every month so far, with the exception of one, has been well below normal. And we're not even 70% of our normal rainfall for the year so far. So we're supposed to be sitting around 53 inches, and we've only got about 36 so far. Sitting in October with drier than normal conditions, the U.S. Drought Monitor does have our area not in drought yet, but it's unusual, which should be our wettest time of the year, is abnormally dry for this time of year. So that's kind of the takeaway at the beginning, and I'll kind of walk through the rainfall that we did receive and the conditions on the ground today. So we'll back up to August here, only 6.5 inches basin wide. On the left side of the screen, the overall trend is if you're further east, you got more rain. If you're further west, you got even less than the 6 inches, generally speaking. So places like the Gordon River Basin only got 5 inches and change for August, which should be, around a 10-inch average. So very unusual. There were a few areas that got more normal rainfall out in Picayune Strand, but very, very isolated in its region. So unusual August, to say the least. And then fast forward to September, and you get to see basically more of the same. Everything is below average, with the exception of the very top of the watershed, the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, Crew areas, and the OK Slough watershed. So it's definitely below average, only 4.5 inches for the coastal regions. So you continue that trend of very, very low rainfall to the west. And October is not disappointed either. We did get a little bit of relief in the middle of the month, right in the heart of the system, which was helpful to bring up surface water levels some, but it really didn't knock anything down in our deficit. So still below average trend for us, only 1.5 inches in the coastal regions again. So, it should be getting around 3-4 inches this month, and nowhere even close to that. So the continuing story is how dry it's been. If we just look at our water year, which, remember, that starts May 1st, and how much water do we get in the wet season, it carries through the following and subsequent dry season. We're 66% of average, so almost 1.5 feet of rainfall deficit moving into the dry season. So not necessarily ideal for the amount of water that's in our environment and in the system, but it may not all be dire news. Then I'll talk more on that a little later. So our region is a little unique in South Florida, is that our rainfall almost all comes in wet season. I think I touched on this last time. 80% of our rainfall falls in that summer time frame. Unlike parts of the East Coast or the Upper Shannon Lakes, where you get more of an even split. Most comes in the wet season there, but you still get a nice healthy amount of rain in the dry season. We don't get that luxury here, so we're really dependent on what we get during those 4 or 5 months in the summer. And on the left side of the screen, you can kind of see in the last 20 years, each line represents accumulation of rainfall for the Southwest coast for that calendar year. The black line's kind of your average, and the red line and the orange line, those are the minimums that we've seen. So the red line is this year. So we're basically just below what we've seen historically in the last 20 years. So it definitely is an interesting year, to say the least. with the very little amount of rainfall that we have, you wouldn't expect large releases out of the system. And we've operated the system in a way to maintain and hold as much fresh water as we can. And so what I've tried to do here is show how much water has actually been released from the system. So for example, here, our Cocoa 1 structure, normally these numbers are much higher. So it's 0.3 thousand acre feet. So that's 300 acre feet out of the system for the whole wet season. Put that into a number that might mean something to someone. If you fill up about 170 Olympic sized pools with that number, if you compare that to last year, it was 15,000 and change. So very different wet season we've had. And GG1, 2% of the normal 11 million gallons per day was the average. If you average it all out, most water treatment plants can, well do beyond that. So we're releasing less water than, you're treating in a water treatment plant a lot of the time. So very interesting year to say the least. But you would expect water levels to be extremely low, given the rainfall, the lack of rainfall we've had. If you look at the left side of the screen, you see blacks, you see blues. That means the surface water levels in our canal system are above normal for October. So we've done a pretty good job at holding every drop that Mother Nature has given us and try to hold it as high up in the system as possible. And we've pretty much consistently done that all year. The natural areas don't necessarily have the benefit of the water control system. So on the right side of the screen, you've got kind of the Crew watershed. Those are in the lower percentiles. There are no control structures. There's nothing we can do other than what Mother Nature, gives the system. So overall, the snapshot in time, it looks pretty good, canal level wise. Now, very quickly, I'll walk through these again and to refresh your memory on what these graphs mean in the charts. The blue bands on all of these are the normal operational band, where if we had all the water in the world, where would we like to hold the water levels? That's where we hold it. The green is our normal. We don't always have all the water we want. So the green is the normal recession that you see throughout the year, the ebb and flow. So when the line is above the green, we're above normal. When it's below the green, then we're kind of below normal. And so you can kind of see from the trend from January to current how we've varied that. So we try to keep the line above the green level as high as we can. We're in our water conservation operations. You'll see that trend throughout the summer. But that's only when there's water available. In these two systems here, there is water available for the most part, and we're able to hold the water levels higher. This one in Cocohatchee, for example, as you see the very top graph, that blue line is bouncing around the very bottom of that blue shaded area. There was no water being released from the system. There wasn't even enough to come in for us to elevate the water level, let alone release it out to tide or anything like that. So that only happened in the last, few weeks where there's been enough rainfall to do something with it. Again, more of the same here at Faki Union Canal System. You see a couple blips in there in the middle of the summer. That was the passing hurricane that came by. So we did make a few adjustments for that. But other than that, we've been at the very top of the range. And then again, more of the same. We're already starting to see that trend down as we exit our wet season. So on the right, you see Henderson Creek #2, which is the very top of that watershed. It's already starting its dry season recession, and we're below normal. So it's been a great deal to talk about Picayune Strand today. So I always try to include some of our operation and kind of how that looks. So the blue and the purple lines, that's our headwater, that's the water level upstream of the pump stations. So we're trying to keep that, to mimic somewhat the historical range before the pump stations were there. But then you can see the actual restoration flows on the bottom part of the chart. You see the on the left, this one's the Faki Union pump station. And but you got to pay special attention to how much water we've pumped. But the y-axis on the left, that the actual capacity of that system is like 2,000 CFS and 2,600 CFS. So our peak this year was only 200. So we're not very much water that we've moved through that system at all, even for restoration. So there's just we got to balance how much water you keep upstream with how much you balance and send to restoration downstream. So I will spend a little time on this slide here. This one's a new one for us. And this takes into account some of the work we've done over the last few years in the Corkscrew Swamp area. So we've surveyed, I've talked about it in the past. We spent a great deal of time surveying and making sure that we know what the ground surface is in the Crew area, not just Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, but downstream and Bird Rookery, so on and so forth. So we want to make sure that was correct to help inform this product here. We also used all of the monitoring that also helps inform this product here. And I'll explain what this product is now. So basically this is a loop of the daily water surface elevation mapped over the last year. So it starts just after Ian this time last year, and at every click is another day. So you can really see the ebb and flow of what Mother Nature gives us and everything. So if the colors are basically yellow and green and blue, the water is above the surface, your wetlands are saturated, you've got standing water. If the water level is below it, the orange, the reds, then your water surface is receded, it's below ground. Generally speaking, there's obviously highs and lows and all that in between, but generally speaking, that's it. But if you look at this, when the cycle starts, you see lots of blues and greens. The water was stacked up from Ian from last wet season, which was very wet. And then basically as it progresses, it never really pops up out of the ground very much. You don't see any greens or blues this year in this northern area, especially right through here. So this is Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary where I'm pointing here roughly. And then our canal sections, our canals are labeled in here. And the other thing, this is a Mockley Road to give you some point of reference. So this is a neat tool. I thought we can refine it some more as we get more data, more monitoring wells come in. And this is produced daily. So we get a snapshot in time every day of what the system looks like, where water levels are in real time. Helps us make decisions on, what can we expect coming into the Corkscrew Canal system? What can we expect going forward? You see the similar things down here in Picayune Strand. So this is Collier Boulevard over here, Henderson Creek, but the Picayune Strand restoration project's over here. So you can see the area where Steve Basin talked about we haven't done restoration yet is this kind of red, this really dark red. That's the product of the canal still draining the area. We haven't seen restoration, so the water levels haven't popped up there yet. The rest of the region, the water's basically on the surface when it's available and we're pumping. You can see for most of the year it is below ground since it's been so dry, but you can see the evidence of the restoration flows coming through here and then the following recession. So groundwater, I'll talk about that here very briefly. Overall, you would expect them to be below average again, given the rainfall we have. You can see on the right, this is a snapshot in time of the handful of groundwater wells in South Florida. And on our coast, they're mostly in the lower percentiles. But that doesn't necessarily mean, it just means it's below average. There's other metrics and things that are looked at to make sure that we're not just looking at the percentile. They have to look at other conditions for, water availability and harm to the aquifer. So we're not to the point of concern at this level. Some of these red and yellow indicators help guide that and is looked at as the water supply group looks at that weekly. So at this point, we're a little below normal, but it's not concerning yet at this point in the game. But like I said, it's not all bad news necessarily. So we've got our long range outlook. We had a very dry, wet season, like I've been saying, but our long range outlook, El Nino continues in the Pacific Ocean. What that means for our winters, we're usually wetter and cooler than normal. So we are expecting above normal rainfall, but we don't know exactly how much. But it might help take the edge some of our dry season effects, and it might help take a dent in our deficit that we've seen over the last year. In the short term, we might actually get a little helpful rainfall over the weekend, not very much, but we might get some. And, we still are in hurricane season. So this graphic's changed a little bit since the slide was produced. Tammy is pretty much fizzled out at this point, is going to head out to sea. And we're monitoring another location down here, but it's unlikely to affect anything at the district at this point. So, and that's expected to go off, but we're still having to monitor that for any potential developments that's spin up this time of year. And I will close there and happy to answer any questions.
Are there any board member questions for Brad? Brad, I just hope you're correct with the wetter and cooler winter this year. And I really enjoyed the fact that you put that new graphic in, that new model in there. Each meeting, you present something to us that's one step up to help our understanding each time. And I really appreciate that. And I'm sure the rest of the board does too. You're making us very, very smart about water. So thank you for that. Anything else? Thank you. All right, that brings us to the monthly financial report. Candy Heater is presenting that report virtually. Candy, are you there?
Yes, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. And I miss not being there, standing in front of you all to respectfully present to you your monthly financial report. But with that said, the monthly financial report that you have in your package is through the month of August. So August 31st, 2023. The financial report illustrates that the Basin has collected excess revenue above what we had intended to collect to balance your budget. We've collected $203,000 of additional revenue. Of that, $22,000 in your ad valorem taxes, bringing your ad valorem tax percentage at 100.2% collection. This time last year, you were at a 99.8%. So we did better this year. The other area is in your investment earnings. You've collected an additional $173,000 of investment earnings compared to what we had conservatively budgeted for revenues to balance your budget. So this year compared to last year, you've collected additional $150,000. So those funds of additional revenues that has been collected will fall to the Basin's balance for the board to be able to allocate in future years. Right now, your finance team here at the district is going through an audit. And once that audit is complete for the fiscal year 23, which ended September 30th, once that audit is completed, you'll have what your true financials are at the end of fiscal year 23. And you will be receiving a September monthly report here next month. So with that said, that's the news that I have for you and concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Candy. Board members, are there any questions for Candy? I don't see any questions, Candy. I want to thank you for bringing us up to date with our financials and bringing us such good news at this point. So thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to our last public comment session. This is another chance for members of the public to participate. Troy, do we have anyone?
We do not, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right, then that brings us to our final board comment. We'll go ahead and I'll poll the board members if you have any final board comments. Michelle McLeod?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Mr. Romano? Any final board comment?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Hill?
I'm going back to fishing. See you next time, guys.
Great.
Thank you.
I have one comment. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Rachel King, who is joining us as the Basin Coordinator. Welcome, Rachel. It's great to have you on board, and you've already been so busy this week. There's been so many emails and everything else. You've literally jumped in full speed ahead. So thank you for that. And it's great to welcome you to the Basin. I'd like to thank the district staff and also the entire Basin team for such great support. Certainly, I'm sure that the newer board members have really appreciated the expertise that you bring to the table and getting everybody up to speed and answering their questions. So your professionalism is really outmatched. It can't be matched, I should say, because you are just a top tier team, and it's a privilege to serve with each and every one of you. And with that, I'm going to thank everyone for participating. Our next meeting is February 24th. Have a great day.